go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to GB News Breakfast, voted by you as the nation's best multi-channel news programme at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Will it cure the NHS? £2.4 billion over 5 years, the most dramatic revamp of our health service in its 75-year history.
In the next few minutes, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will outline his plans, which are expected to include more university places for medical and nursing students and a greater emphasis on apprenticeships.
Well, this is the scene live in Downing Street, where we are expecting the Prime Minister to go through the details at a news conference. But earlier, he had been at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, insisting that new roles being brought in the NHS would ensure that people were trained properly and regulated properly. A massive shake-up in how the NHS recruits and retrains staff, promising thousands more workers, some of whom, though, will train on the job. Yes, apprentice doctors.
Yes, 60,000 more doctors and an extra 170,000 more nurses. This has been billed as the most radical reform in the NHS's history. Earlier, the Prime Minister said that we should be modernising the NHS so it is fit for the future. He said new roles like physician associates have been used in America for years and other countries as well. It's something, the Prime Minister says, that people have talked about for a long time, and we are going to do it.
Now, just to underline the need for this, the estimate is that the NHS will still be short of 360,000 staff by 2037. The shortfall at the moment, 112,000, including, of course, doctors and nurses, and an acknowledgement in this plan that it's not just trying to recruit but retain staff. So here is the Prime Minister in Downing Street to unveil the details.
For 75 years, the NHS has existed for an enduring moral purpose: to give every single person in our country the security that comes from knowing that if you're sick, you will be cared for. Rich or poor, young or old, in work or out, the NHS
Well, we appear to have a break-up in the signal there from Downing Street. We will obviously get the sound back. Here it comes. We can see the Prime Minister now. Let's hear again from him.
And the difference made by the hundreds of thousands of others who sacrificed so much for so many in the service of that higher purpose of protecting our nation's health. But while that purpose has never changed, what has changed are the challenges facing the NHS. Our society is growing older. The burden of illness is changing, and all of this will put pressure on an already overstretched workforce. A couple of weeks ago, I joined doctors and nurses on the late shift at Watford General Hospital. I saw courageous, hard-working men and women doing extraordinary things in difficult circumstances. And they told me the same message we hear time and time again from leaders in the healthcare sector and the public. We need more doctors and nurses to ease the pressures, and we need reform to free them up to do their jobs properly. And they're right. Governments from all parties have ducked the challenge for decades. It just isn't right that we don't train enough people here at home to properly staff our National Health Service. Now, overcoming this won't be quick or easy. It's only possible because of the difficult decisions we're taking elsewhere to cut the debt. And by prioritising the NHS, there will be other things that we can't afford. But the NHS is too important. So we're making the tough calls and doing things differently to protect the long-term future of the NHS and this country. Already we've made progress, with more investment in the NHS than any government before, including up to £14 billion extra for health and social care over the next 2 years. We've not only hit our manifesto target to recruit 26,000 more primary care staff, we've done so 1 year early. And we're very close to meeting our promise to recruit 50,000 more nurses. And we're cutting the waiting lists, with waits of over 2 years virtually eliminated in England, and the number of patients waiting over 18 months reduced by over 90%. But even without the COVID backlogs, and even with the record number of doctors and nurses we have today, unless we act now for the long term, the challenges we face will only get worse. So today, we're announcing the most ambitious transformation in the way that we staff the NHS in its history, the long-term workforce plan. This is a 15-year plan to deliver the biggest ever expansion in the number of doctors and nurses that we train, and a plan to reform the NHS so we deliver better care in a changing world, and a plan that not only eases the pressures today, but protects this precious national institution for the long term. This is the NHS's own plan, and the government is proud to back it, funding the expansion of education and training for the first 5 years in full, with over £2.4 billion of additional investment. You can trust this government with the NHS. The plan rests on 3 principles: train, retain, and reform. First, training. We'll double the number of medical training places by 2031, focusing on areas where there are too few doctors today. We'll train over 24,000 more nurses and midwives a year, and increase the number of GP training places by 50%. In time, this will allow us to reduce our spending on temporary agency staff by £10 billion and cut the need for international recruitment. Today, the proportion recruited from overseas is around 1 in 4. With our plan, it will fall to just 1 in 10. Second, doctors and other clinicians can spend a lifetime gaining invaluable experience. We want to hang on to those skills for as long as we can, so we'll retain more of our dedicated workforce, keeping up to 130,000 more staff in the NHS over the next 15 years. We already offer best-in-class pensions, and we've just dramatically cut the tax on pension savings, a move that has been called transformative. Now we're going to modernise the pension scheme so staff can partially retire or return to work much more easily if they wish to. And we're going to improve conditions right now for those who gave so much during the pandemic. To do that, we're improving culture, leadership and well-being, giving staff more flexibility and control, and investing in their professional development. Finally, we need reform. It's not enough just to have more doctors and nurses. We need to change the way they work so that they can deliver better care for patients. Now, partly this is about seizing the opportunities of new technologies like AI, or just look at virtual wards, which use technology to allow patients to recover at home, providing a better service at lower cost. But we're also going to expand new roles like nurse associates and physician associates so that the most qualified staff can focus on patients with the most complex needs. We're going to drive the biggest ever expansion of apprenticeships in the NHS so that 1/5 of all clinical training will be offered through degree apprenticeships, helping to bring staff into the NHS from a much wider range of backgrounds. And will give staff in the NHS more opportunities to progress, such as becoming a nurse or a doctor, as well as making sure that the workforce of the future has the advanced knowledge they need to care for our ageing population. Now, taken together, these changes will raise NHS productivity, so patients get more and better care for the same money. So, training, retention, and reform. That's our plan to build the healthcare workforce of the future and secure the NHS for the long term. Next week marks the 75th anniversary of the NHS. For every minute of every day of every one of those 75 years, the NHS has been kept going by the millions of people that have worked for it. To them, on behalf of a grateful nation, I want to say thank you. I feel a powerful sense of responsibility to make sure that their legacy endures and to make sure that the NHS is there for our children and grandchildren, just as it was there for us. And that's what today's plan is all about. More doctors, more nurses, better care for all, today and long into the future. Thank you. I'm just going to hand over to Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. So it's a real pleasure to be with you here at the launch of the first ever NHS long-term workforce plan. As the Prime Minister has just said, the Health Service reaches a major milestone next week, the 75th anniversary of our founding. The publication of this ambitious and bold NHS plan feels, however, an even more significant moment than that anniversary, because it's the first time since 1948 that we have been asked by government to produce a long-term comprehensive assessment of our staffing needs and a plan to deliver them. So I would like to thank the Prime Minister and the Chancellor for wholeheartedly backing the plan and kick-starting delivery with significant investment that will fully fund record numbers of training places for doctors, for nurses and for other staff needed over the next 5 years. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to improve patient care by putting staffing on a sustainable footing. And I would like just to take this moment to thank all of my colleagues across the NHS and beyond who have worked so hard with us to produce it. Your input has been invaluable. The NHS can do nothing without its staff. The last few years in particular have shown, I think, again, just the brilliance of our staff, caring for over 1 million people with COVID in hospitals, delivering the biggest vaccination programme in our history, dealing with the busiest winter on record, as well as making progress on backlogs and on cancer diagnoses. However, we already have 112,000 vacancies, and as we know, our population is going to grow, it's going to age, and as new treatments and therapies come online, the demands on the NHS and on our workforce are only going to increase. Since the foundation of the NHS, we've relied on the skills and dedication of staff who came here from the 4 corners of the globe to care for patients, and there will always be a place for them in the NHS. But demand for healthcare workers is increasing and will continue increasing across the world. So doing nothing is not an option. And as the Prime Minister says, we're not going to do nothing. Instead, we are going to do the boldest set of changes for workforce ever in the history of the NHS. We will increase the number of homegrown doctors, nurses and other staff as part of the biggest workforce expansion in our history, and we will draw on the widest possible pool of talent by expanding new routes into the profession so more people can get a nursing or a medical degree without going to university full-time. But recruitment is only part of the answer. We will also retain more of the staff we have and reform the way that they train and work, so we're making the most of everyone's education, skills and experience. Better opportunities for career development, improving flexible working options alongside government reforms to the pension scheme should mean around 130,000 more staff stay working in NHS settings longer. Changes in technology and new treatments will change the way we work in future, as well as the numbers and the roles that are needed in the future. So from care closer to home with medicines available on the high street and more staff receiving training to spot early signs of cardiovascular disease, cancer and stroke, through to those colleagues working in virtual wards and beyond, this plan is not just good news for NHS staff, it is good news for patients too. And this plan will be regularly updated to ensure we stay on track to deliver the workforce we need to deliver the best possible care now and into the future. Working in the NHS is not always easy, as the last few years in particular have shown, but it does offer a huge variety of careers with more than 350 different roles within the NHS. So I would like to close by urging anyone thinking about making a change in their career or at school or university thinking about what to do next to consider an opportunity for a career in the NHS.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, brilliant to hear from the CEO of the NHS. We're now going to hear from Steve Powers, the NHS Medical Director. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So, as Amanda has said, this is a very important day, indeed an historic day, for the NHS, for all who work in it, and of course for the patients that we all care for. I know it takes a team to care for a patient, so not just doctors like me, but nurses, physios, therapists, porters, cleaners, the list goes on. So growing the workforce will help to ensure that that team have the time they need to give the standard of care that they want to provide and that they've been trained to give. We also have the opportunity to recruit, train and work differently in a way that is both rewarding for staff and also more productive for patients and for the country. So, like the Prime Minister and like Amanda, I really truly believe this is a landmark day for the NHS, just ahead of our 75th anniversary. And it's a landmark day for all who are employed within the NHS and, of course, most of all, for those that we care for. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to take some questions from the media. Can we start with the BBC, please?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Hugh Pym, BBC News. Work on this plan was at least underway early last year. Why has it taken so long to get it launched, and have you lost valuable time there? And a quick second one, Lord Goldsmith has resigned this morning criticising you over the environment. What's your reaction, and did you ask him to apologise over his comments on the Privileges Committee?
Thank you, Hugh. Look, quickly on Lord Goldsmith, he was asked to apologise for his comments about the Privileges Committee, because I felt that those were incompatible with his position as a minister. He's obviously chosen to take a different course. I accept that. I'm proud of the record of this government, and indeed of Zach in government, making sure that we tackle climate change and protect our natural environment. I think the UK has played a leadership role globally, and we will continue to do so, as you will see. Now, on your question about the plan, I think you've heard how Amanda and Steve and numerous other healthcare bodies have described it today. Landmark, historic, momentous, important. First time it's happened in 75 years. So it was important that we got it right, because this is a really important day, and this sets the NHS up for decades to come. So taking the time to get it right is absolutely the correct course of action, and I think, as you'll be able to see from the plan today, it's very comprehensive. There are 3 strands to it. It's not just about training more doctors and nurses. Of course that's important, and everyone knows we need to do that, and we're doing that. But the 2 other strands are also important, about how do we retain our fantastic NHS workers, something Amanda might be able to touch on in a second. But we know we need to do a better job of that, and we've got a clear set of initiatives and proposals that will do that. But then also reform, because I know everyone wants to know that the government is backing the NHS with funding, and we're doing that. Record sums that have been put in by me, the Chancellor, and Steve, the Health Secretary. But we also want to make sure that money is well spent, and that the NHS is modernised so it is fit for the future to deliver the care that we all need, and do so in a way that is keeping up with how healthcare is changing. So look, 3 strands: train, retain and reform. This is a historic moment. It's an important moment. This will set the NHS up for years, if not decades, into the future. So I don't make any apology about taking the time to get it right. And I think, as you can see from the reception, it's a plan that will be warmly welcomed and make an enormous difference to the country, and indeed the NHS and the incredible people that work for it. I don't know, Amanda, do you want to touch on some of the retention bit, perhaps, or what, the things that we've been working on?
Very happy to talk a bit about retention, because I guess that goes slightly to your question, Hugh, about the time that it's going to take, clearly, to recruit, to train some of the staff that we're describing. But I think the retention actions clearly are for today. They're for now. So 2 really big things that it's worth mentioning. One is, we know flexibility really matters to our staff. So partly that's been addressed through some of the pension reforms, but we've recently announced initiatives like enabling doctors who might be considering retiring to continue to work more flexibly for the NHS, because we'd rather have some of their time than none of their time. So a range of things that will support people, particularly with flexibility around career end. The second thing we know really matters is career progression. So part of this plan, of course, is about more of those sorts of roles that we know can bring people into the NHS, nurse associates, we've talked about already, but also opportunities then for those people to progress through. So whether that's nurse associates becoming qualified nurses, becoming then advanced practitioners, or in a range of other ways, that's the other big component. But I think what Steve would say on retention, and this is another, I think, important point about why the long-term sustainability matters so much, is when you are working in the NHS, in fact we were talking about it as we were coming over today, and you turn up on a shift and it's people you're not familiar with working with, there are gaps in the rotas, that makes it really hard for people to feel they can do their best work looking after patients. So knowing that in time we will get to a place where we have a sustainable workforce solution also matters for staff who are working with us today.
I think, just quickly before we move on, about the time that we've been spending to get this right, and Steve maybe could spend 30 seconds on it, is we also wanted to engage and listen to people. Right, this wasn't a plan that Amanda and Steve just concocted in their office and then sat down with Steve and me and the Chancellor to put together. What we've been doing with the time is talking to, I think, something like 60-odd organisations and 100-odd experts in the healthcare field, and Steve can speak to that because he's been doing a lot of that engagement. We chaired a roundtable just here in Downing Street earlier this week, because we wanted to make sure that we heard from everyone involved in the NHS, and that we got all their ideas on board. We discussed with them what they were looking for, what were the things that would make the most difference, and make sure that we do this together. Because ultimately, I can stand here and announce this. Amanda and Steve are here with me, and as we discussed with everyone else earlier this week, this is a plan that will ultimately need to be delivered by all the incredible people working and leading the NHS. So it's important that they were part of this journey and that the plan is as much theirs as it is ours. But Steve, you've been doing that for months.
That's an incredibly important point, because part of the reason it's taken time is because we really wanted to engage with all the people that we work for. So Jeanette is sitting in the audience today, the upcoming chairman of the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, and the medical royal colleges in the medical space have been working closely with us, but also professional bodies throughout all the professions in the NHS. What struck me at the round table that was held here earlier this week was just the positivity from all those representatives of all those key bodies that were in the room. They were up for the challenge. They recognise that this is rightly a challenging plan, both in terms of numbers and both in terms of the reform that needs to happen. But they were up for it. I've been talking to leaders of universities, university leaders who were in the room as well, earlier this week, to the GMC, who's a regulator on the medical workforce, on the ambition to shorten the curriculum for medical students, to introduce apprenticeships, to widen the access for people coming into medical schools. They are really up for it. Yes, it's going to be challenging over the 5-year period where the 2.4 billion is targeted. That is around the timescale it will take to build the new medical schools, to put the additional places in the system. But it's a challenge, but people are absolutely up for it, and it is entirely doable.
Thank you. Right, we turn to ITV next.
Anushka Stan at ITV News. There's lots of new money in here, Prime Minister, for training, but not new money for pay. And yet we've had former NHS workers tell us that one of the reasons they left was below inflation pay rises. I just wanted to ask you, do you accept that pay hits morale in the NHS? And also, this is in the long term. What will it mean for patients who are on waiting lists now? And to Amanda Pritchard and to Steve Powis, can I just ask you about a short-term workforce challenge you're facing? How worried are you about doctors' strikes next month? And do you want to see the government do more to stop them?
And Anushka, you asked about pay. Look, of course, would everyone like to be paid more? Of course they would be. But I think everyone also recognises the economic context that we're in. And our job in government is to balance all those things, make sure that we reward people fairly and well for the incredible work they're doing, particularly our NHS workers, but also make sure that we're doing things that are good for them and the rest of the country in the long term, and that means bringing down inflation, because it won't help anybody if we just take the easy course and ultimately make the situation worse and last longer. And actually, I'm really pleased that the NHS Staff Council, which represents over half a dozen unions, over 1 million NHS workers, actually voted to accept the government's pay offer, because I think they did recognise that it was fair and reasonable, rewarded their members for their hard work. And I'm very grateful to all of them for doing that, because I know that fundamentally what they care about is working really hard to deliver excellent healthcare. We wanted to reward that. The 5% pay rise for this forthcoming year, together with one-off bonuses of up to £2,000, that money is going to be hitting people's pay packets literally in the next months. It will start making a real difference to people. But it is important that we balance all these considerations, and we'll continue to do so. But also, it's the reason we can do this today is because we in government prioritise. We prioritise the things that are really important. No government can do absolutely everything. Of course they can't, and particularly not in the economic circumstances that we face now. That would be enormously counterproductive. But this is something that the Chancellor and I have known that we wanted to do for a long time. In fact, Jeremy wrote a book about this some years ago. And so we've always known we wanted to do this, and we've made sure that in all our thinking and all our financial planning that we would be able to fund this. Because we knew that this was the right thing to do, and it was the country's #1 priority. It was our priority to put the NHS on a secure footing for the long term, to do the difficult thing that no other government has done before. That's what we've done today, but that does involve looking in the round and prioritising, and that's what we've done. And I think, you talked to Amanda and Steve, but you talked about, Amanda's already talked about retention. There are many reasons that go into how can we improve retention in the NHS. I won't repeat everything Amanda says, but we are investing in lots of them. I think actually, I was just talking to people this morning when I was out in Cambridgeshire at the hospital there. Something that's valuable to them is the training support they get after they start work, and that's something that we've done. Right? So we've introduced a £1,000 training budget for nurses, midwives, once they qualify, they get access to a training budget to continue supporting them in their career. So there are other ways that we can support people alongside pay. But on the workforce challenges of today, obviously you should hear from Amanda and Steve, but of course it is challenging when people take industrial action. We've already had over 500,000 patients' care disrupted as a result of industrial action. I don't want to see that. I'm sure Amanda and Steve don't want to see that. So, I'd ask everyone to recognise the economic context that we're in. And as I said, I'm very grateful to the NHS Staff Council and the over 1 million workers they represent for accepting the government's pay deal and working with us to deliver great quality care. Anything you want to add, Amanda?
Probably not a great deal, but I think it is worth just really taking a moment to acknowledge the level of pressure that our colleagues in the NHS are under. Enormous demands, both from kind of COVID backlogs as well as everyday pressures. So I think that is why it is so important that we do have a long-term plan that gives a clear kind of blueprint to get to a place where we will have a more sustainable, in fact, a sustainable staffing position within the NHS, because we know how much that matters to staff now, as well as how much that matters for us being able to provide the care that we need to provide for patients in the future as well. Short term, and we've talked a lot about the retention aspect of the plan already. There's a lot more detail behind it that we could certainly talk about, but I think we're very conscious that it is really important that, my job, it's not my job to deal with issues of pay. That's between government and the unions, but it is my job to make sure that we are doing everything we can to support our staff to be able to work in a way that feels well supported, where they've got the flexibility that works for them and works for patients, where they've got the career development that we know matters for them, and that's why that's such a big part of the plan.
Thanks. I think, Steve, anything to add?
Yes, just simply on planning for strikes, and I'm aware that there are more strikes planned for next month. We will be doing what we've been doing throughout. Our job, Amanda and our colleagues in NHS, our job is to prepare for those strikes, to ensure that we keep patients safe, that we keep those services going, that we can keep going. Of course, we'll be focusing on making sure emergency services, maternity services, trauma services, those key services are kept intact and running as normal and as safe. We will be, of course, keeping channels open with the unions to flag to them anything that we are worried about, and we expect them to respond positively if we do that. So we will be doing that. Of course, we want to support our staff, whether they're striking or not, and of course all of us would like to see these disputes resolved. And as the Prime Minister said, some of those disputes have been resolved over the course of the year. And even for senior doctors, if you go back to earlier this year, when the BMA set out what they wanted to see, one of the three things was on pensions reform. And of course, pensions reform has been delivered, and that now is off the table as an issue. So, I have to remain, I always will remain optimistic that we can make progress. But what we're talking about today is both in the short term and in the long term, putting in place the conditions that mean job satisfaction and getting people enjoying work and wanting to come to work is there every day, every week in the NHS. And putting in more resilience, because it has been a really tough time, as Amanda has said, particularly over the pandemic.
I'd just add, I sit down with Steve, Amanda and Steve and others almost every week, and in spite of the industrial action, we are still making progress on cutting the waiting list. Right? And that is down to the extraordinary efforts of everyone involved. But if you look at waiting lists, we've, as I said, virtually eliminated 1.5-year waiters. We've eliminated 2-year waiters last year. Look at A&E and ambulance times, strong recovery from winter. We're rolling out virtual wards, more hospital surgical hubs to do elective surgery, more community diagnostic centres, more use of virtual wards. All those things are making a difference right now and improving people's experience with the NHS, improving their care, and we're managing to do that in spite of the industrial action, and that's thanks to an enormous amount of hard work from a lot of people. And that is, as I said, we put record funding in weeks after I became Prime Minister. We're using that funding to good effect. Next, GB News.
Catherine Forster, GB News. Obviously, a huge amount to be welcomed in these plans. But in the short term, you've got cut waiting lists emblazoned across all the podiums. Currently, you've got a record 7.4 million people on waiting lists. You've got junior doctors going to strike for 5 days, also consultants. You spent last year saying, we'll go with whatever the independent pay review body recommends. Now you're not guaranteeing that you'll do even that. Are you confident that you can deliver on this priority and all of your 5 priorities in a significant way before the next election?
The simple answer is yes, I am. And that's why I set them out very clearly at the beginning of the year. Actually unusual, and it's great that everyone's talking about them, because I think it's right that leaders and politicians set very clear objectives, make it crystal clear to the country what they're trying to achieve, so that I and everyone else can be held accountable for them. And it's good that they're transparent and everyone can understand what we're about. And we are making progress. In spite of the challenges that we face, we are doing things that are improving people's experience of patient care right now. As I said, for their sins, Amanda and Steve have to come and see me all the time, and we go through this on a very regular basis together with Steve. But let's talk about urgent and emergency care. Everyone remembers how challenging that was over the winter. You know, we have an urgent emergency care recovery plan. It involves more doctors, more nurses, more ambulances, then also more use of faster discharge and virtual wards. All of those things are helping us improve our urgent and emergency care performance. Ambulance waiting times that were 1.5 hours, Cat 2, overwintered down to around about half an hour, and we're making good progress. A&E waiting times around, they were 65%, 4 hours at the worst point, now up close to 75%. Virtual wards, Steve is doing a good job of rolling out across the country. What does that mean? Stops people from coming into hospital in the first place, gets them home quicker once they're there. Better patient care for them, improves the flow through the hospital. The money that we've put into social care, helping us discharge people quicker out of hospitals because they should be at home and need to be at home, that also helps. So the money that we've put in, that the Chancellor put in, as I said, weeks after I took office, is making a real difference. It's making a real difference right now to people. And is industrial action challenging? Of course it's challenging. Does it make everything harder? Of course it does. But we are still making progress. And in terms of the backlogs, we always knew that they would continue to grow. Right? There's the bounce back from COVID that we knew would happen. That was always forecast to happen. But in spite of that, we're eliminating steadily but surely the people who are waiting a very long time. Just recently, we made a significant announcement to give people choice about where they get their treatment. So from now on, when you get referred for further treatment from your GP, you'll be able to use the website or your app to select from different providers. And in doing so, you'll be able to cut your waiting times, because we know, and the research is very clear, that actually once you give that choice to people and they have the option of choosing a different hospital, it can cut waiting times by around 3 months. And that's something that we are now in the process of rolling out. And later this year, that choice will be extended to people who are already on waiting lists, and that will help us bring the waiting list down even further. So look, those are all examples of things we're doing right now that will make a big difference to people, and that's why I'm confident we will continue to make progress and people will continue to see their improvement of the NHS at all levels. Urgent and emergency care, elective and outpatients, all primary care will just continue to improve. That's what we're all dedicated to deliver, and I'm confident that we will. Telegraph.
Daniel Martin, The Telegraph. Many people find it very hard to get an NHS dentist. Do you think that more dentists should work in the NHS, and is there anything in the plan which would help achieve that?
The simple answer is yes and yes. So the plan has an increase in dentistry training places. Steve might want to talk to that in a little bit more detail perhaps, but that's in the plan as well. And we are aware of the challenges in NHS dentistry. We've obviously reformed the dentistry contracts. That's something we've done recently. We're allowing some dentists that are high performing to do up to 10% more than their contracted amounts. There are more dentists in the NHS today, hundreds, than there were previously, and we're seeing far more children now through NHS dentistry than we were a year before. But I know that there are challenges. The long-term workforce plan will help us fix those over time. And the other thing that we are exploring is the possibility of introducing what's called a tie-in for dentistry. I mean, around about 2/3 of dentists, after they finish their specialty training, end up not doing work in the NHS. That's something that we want to look at, and it may be that the appropriate thing to do is to introduce a tie so that people are performing more NHS work after they qualify. Of course, they've benefited from a very significant subsidy from the taxpayer worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, so that seems a reasonable approach. That's something we're going to explore, but we are also funding an expansion of dental training places. I don't know, Steve or Amanda, anything you want to add on that?
Well, it's exactly that. We are in the plan there is a plan to expand dental training places as well, and also allied professions to dentistry as well. So that will put more capacity and more dentists into the system over time as well. The tie-in, Prime Minister talked about, that's something that we're considering as well. But of course there are wider issues around access to dentistry, and so we are working collectively with Secretary of State and others around a dental recovery plan as well. So I guess more to come on that.
The other thing, we talked about this reform piece, and we haven't talked about it very much actually in the Q&A, but one of the examples of reform is in dentistry, where we can have people who are not dentists but are in as other allied health professionals, where it's I think what they call therapists or dental, one of the roles where we expect them to do more dental work going forward than they've done in the past, and that's one of the regulatory changes that we're looking at making. Again, it's an example of us doing things differently, modernising the health service, but we want everyone to be operating at the top of their licence, right? So the people who have got the full brand spanking degrees should focus on the things that only they can do, and where we can find different roles, create new roles, change how we regulate to allow other people to perform other tasks that they are capable of doing, that's what we should be doing. That would improve healthcare for all of us and make a more productive healthcare system. And actually, we're doing that in dentistry as well as doing it everywhere else. OK, next, Daily Mail.
Thanks, Graham. One for the medics. You've got patient satisfaction at a record low. This is obviously a long-term plan. Realistically, will people start to notice any difference within the next 12 months? Or given that you've got strikes going on left, right and centre, might people have to accept that things will get worse before they get better? And PM, can I ask you about yesterday's appeal court judgment? Are you confident that you can win in the Supreme Court? Are you surprised to find the UNHCR arguing against you when it sends people there itself? And will we finally get the first flight in the air this year?
Do you guys want to take the first one and then I'll...
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off on that one. So thank you. So I think your question about will patients notice a difference? Well, so everything we are doing is, of course, geared towards making things better for patients, as well as making sure that our staff have really rewarding careers and they have enough people with the right skills to enable them to look after the patients the way we know they want to. So the things that will make a difference immediately, we've talked about some of the really important things on retention, some of the new roles that we've talked about, Prime Minister just mentioned reform, some of the new roles and the increases in those roles will come on stream much more quickly because the training periods are obviously are reduced. So I think there is a lot in this plan that speaks to today, as well as the confidence it can give our current staff about the fact that we will get to a place where we have a sustainable staffing model in the longer term. On the range of things, though, outside just the workforce plan, I think the Prime Minister has actually just given a pretty comprehensive run-through of many of the things that we are doing, which are all about making sure that we are making an impact, as we already are, whether that is on reducing the number of people who are waiting, as we say, virtually eliminated now 2-year waits, over 90% reduction in 18-month waits, and we're now focused on 65 weeks is the next big target on that, or it's about the work that we're doing to improve ambulance response times, A&E performance, both of which have sustainably and significantly improved since winter, or it's the work we're doing on increasing the number of people getting cancer checks, record levels, which is leading to record numbers of people being diagnosed at stage 1 and stage 2, and actually we're seeing that impact now on survival rates, which is ultimately, you know, the big goal there. So whether you're looking at any of those things, or indeed primary care, where we've recently launched a primary care access recovery plan, which has a range of things in that to support incredibly hard-working colleagues in primary care through things, and Secretary of State has been working very closely with us on all of this, looking at where we can use things like technology to really make things better, not just for patients, easier for them, but better and easier for our staff too. So I would very much hope that patients will already see the benefit of the work that we've been doing on those sorts of things, but certainly a lot more to come.
Can I just emphasise something, sorry, before Steve comes in, that Amanda said I think is really important and probably not well understood. Right now, the NHS is doing more, treating more people, seeing more people, diagnosing more people, scanning more people than it has ever done. right? So because of the investment that we've put in and because of the innovations in how we're doing things, whether it's virtual wards or community diagnostic centres or elective surgical hubs, whatever it might be, all the new ways we're doing things and the funding, the NHS is doing more than it's ever done. Right, so yes, of course we have a challenge that people are waiting longer than we'd like. Yes, we know why that is. It's because we have a massive backlog that built up over 2 years of COVID where we were not able to see everyone, and we always knew that would be the case. But people should be reassured that because of the investment and the hard work and the innovations, right now thousands and thousands of people every day are being seen who would not have otherwise been seen, and that's because of the extra as I said, funding, resources, innovations that we're putting in. So yes, we will get. That's why I'm confident we will get there. And the trajectory for all those things is up. Right, we have plans for all of these things to just keep increasing the amount of activity that the NHS can do, and that's how we will ultimately bring all these waiting lists down. Steve, anything you want to add?
Well, you mentioned surveys, and when we look at surveys and when we hear what people tell us, what they tell us is that they very firmly believe in the principles of the NHS and the NHS as it is set up as a delivery model for healthcare. They tell us that when they get care, they're very satisfied, but what they're frustrated at is access to care, whether it's in general practice, you mentioned dentistry, and of course getting people to urgent emergency care services quickly as well. And that's why that has been the focus of the plans that we have published with the government this year. And a very, very specific example that Amanda touched on, which is in general practice, where we know again that the levels of satisfaction are high when you see somebody in primary care, when you see a healthcare professional, GP or other clinician, but there's a frustration in getting through that 8 a.m. Log jam on a Monday morning. Cloud telephony, which sounds a really simple thing, technology that is used in other industries, people will be familiar with, but it's actually transformational. And if you go and stand for a morning or visit for a morning a surgery where they have implemented it, what you see is behind the scenes a practice that is giving access to people on the day, that is sorting the problems, who are able to call back automatically rather than people hanging on, who are able to know how many people are waiting and therefore divert staff in order to deal with the pressures at a particular time of day, who have got their processes sorted behind the scenes to ensure that the patient gets to the right clinician. That might be a phone call, it might be a digital consultation, it might be a face-to-face appointment at a time that the patient is convenient to the patient. And that is the future of primary care. And when you see it in action, it is really, really quite transformational and incredibly impressive. So the plan is to use technology and to use this workforce plan and the other plans that we've got to make sure that happens everywhere, not just somewhere. And that's exactly what we aim to do.
And just on Steve's point on primary care, which is exactly right and very well made, what are we doing? We're providing grants for thousands of GP practices so that they can switch to the system that Steve just described that is so much better for patients. So we are saying to GP practices, sign up, we're going to give you a grant so that you can install that cloud-based telephony system, get the training, by the way, that you also need for your teams and support you while you do the transition. There's now a grant available from us. We funded that because we think that will make a big difference to people's experience of accessing their GP by moving to that new technology. And what are one of the other things we're doing? We're changing how pharmacies work, moving to a pharmacy-first model where this winter you will be able to go to your pharmacist and for 7 common ailments like ear infections, sore throat, sinusitis, UTIs and other things, the pharmacist will be able to give you the medicines that you need. Right, that is an example of us doing something differently, as well as expanding more blood pressure checks and indeed oral contraception in pharmacies. That again means that people will be able to get access to healthcare quicker, relieve some of the pressure on GPs. And to Amanda's point, these are the types of examples of things that are making a difference in the here and now. And on your other question, Jason, look, I respect the court, but I fundamentally disagree with their conclusions. I strongly believe, and the Lord Chief Justice made clear that he agrees with this as well, that the Rwandans have provided all the assurances necessary to ensure that there is no real risk that asylum seekers that are relocated under our policy would be wrongly returned to third countries. Rwanda is a safe country. The High Court agrees with that, and indeed you mentioned the UNHCR. They use Rwanda for their own refugee scheme for Libyan refugees. And given all of that, we're going to seek permission to appeal this decision to the Supreme Court. And I've said it before from here, I'll say it again, the policy of this government is very simple. It is your government, and it is not criminal gangs who should decide who comes here. Right? It is a very simple point of view. It is our country, it is our government who should decide who comes here, not criminal gangs, and I'll do what is necessary to make sure that that happens. I said that, well, there's a matter for the courts in terms of their timeline. Next, I know we're running out of time, so let's try and rattle through a couple more. The Sun.
We know that thousands of doctors are fleeing to Australia to go and take advantage of their really lucrative system and really good pay and offers and conditions that they've got over there. Obviously, after training in the NHS for many, many years, obviously at the taxpayer's expense, do you guys not think that there should be some form of mandatory training to keep those doctors in the NHS for longer? And just on Rwanda, if I may, what is your plan B for those Tory MPs who are saying this plan just might not work, it might not take off the ground? And how are those talks going with other countries to put in similar deals if this plan doesn't come through? Thank you.
I'll do quickly both of those. Look, on your first point, look, I read all those reports as well, and I was concerned. Health Secretary was concerned. We sat down and we went through it all together. Actually, we just went and looked through the data, and the data shows that it is not as widespread a practice as I think people assume it is. And clearly, if it was, we would look to do something, and that's why with dentistry, as we've touched on before, where we think there is a potential issue there, we are exploring as you mentioned, the possibility of introducing a dental tie-in. But when it comes to doctors, and Steve might have better numbers than me, but it was around, I think, 95% of people who, after they completed their foundation training, were still working in the NHS. So I think the scale of what is happening is not at the level that people commonly assume it is, and for that reason, we didn't think it was the right approach. But as I said, if we think there is an issue, we are prepared to take action, and you're seeing that with dentistry, where we're contemplating whether it does make sense to introduce the tie. And on Rwanda, I'm just going to repeat what I said before. We are confident in our case. Right? The High Court agreed with us. The Lord Chief Justice agreed with us. Rwanda doesn't even have returns agreements with other countries, and they've provided a set of safeguards and assurances to us about the treatment of refugees that will be sent there that we believe are strong, and so the High Court and the Lord Chief Justice agreed with that. So we will seek permission to appeal this case to the Supreme Court, and we remain entirely confident that what we're doing is right, and it is also fair, because there is nothing moral or compassionate by allowing the current system to continue. Right? People are just needlessly dying as they try and make these crossings. They are exploited by criminal gangs. You spend any time with the people who are actually, as I've done, in the channel, picking people up, seeing the conditions that they are subject to, seeing what children are subject to, would find it very hard to justify maintaining this system. And this will always be a compassionate and tolerant country. We have welcomed almost 500,000 people here from all different parts of the world over the last few years. We will continue to do that, but we want to make sure that that compassion is targeted on the people who most need our help, and that our generosity is not exploited by gangs, and that is what our policy will seek to do. And you talk about other deals, you can already see some signs of progress there with the cooperation that we're having with the French, but also Albania, where our new returns agreement and the new approach to dealing with illegal migrants from Albania means that we have reduced the numbers by around 90% so far since that deal was signed, and we've returned almost 2,000 illegal migrants to Albania. So that, to me, shows that deterrence works. So when you can have a system where people know that if they come here illegally, they won't be allowed to stay, they will be returned, they stop coming. And that's a policy that we want to roll out more broadly. Great. Last one from the Times.
Prime Minister there, another question on Rwanda, saying that the policy was fair and right, but indicating, yes, there will be, of course, that Supreme Court decision to come. But it is, as Professor Stephen Power said, this landmark day for the NHS that has dominated this news conference with the outlining of this 151 pages of a 15-year plan, 2.4 billion for the next 5 years. So the Prime Minister saying you can trust this government with the NHS, but it does seem as if it will be future governments that will be given this trust as well. Tom Harwood, our Deputy Political Editor, is with us. And the key being, Tom, that this is a plan from the shop floor, if you like. It is from within the NHS. It's not being imposed by the government.
This is the branding that the government have stuck all over this plan. They're putting out social media images saying this new plan, made by the NHS, NHS supported by the government. And you can see that clearly in this press conference today, front and centre, those two medical professionals from within the NHS. It's a technocratic vision of what should be happening. This is the Prime Minister almost saying, this isn't my plan. This isn't the Conservatives' plan.
This is what you want.
This is the NHS's plan, and we're simply supporting it. Now, of course, that's not quite true, is it? Because, of course, ministers have drawn this up in consultation with those within the NHS. But ultimately, it's interesting how this has landed, because the Labour Party aren't opposing this plan. Their only criticism is, why didn't you do this earlier? And to that extent, this will have landed fairly well for the Prime Minister today. It's no coincidence that that looked fairly similar to a COVID press conference where the Prime Minister, back when he was Chancellor, made his name, became the most popular politician for a time in the country. This was trying to exert an air of authority, as if the government has a grip over a situation that, frankly, many people around the country feel they have not had a grip over for too long.
Yeah, let's bring in writer and commentator Roy Lilly, if we can. Good to see you, Roy. What do you make of what you heard there? Tom saying it's landed very well, or fairly well, for the Prime Minister. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think Tom's right. It has landed well, and certainly because it's been written by the NHS, and I've seen some of the, the workings that have got it this far. It's had huge consultations, and it's got the NHS's fingerprints all over it. Tom is right, of course. There's going to be an election in 18 months, and who knows? If we look at the polling data now, it's probably Labour who are going to have to implement this. So, will they find the 2.4 billion to get it going? This is a 15-year plan. For me, there were 4 questions I wanted answered. Was how many more people are we going to have? How quick can we recruit them? How much will it cost? And how will we keep them? And the plan deals with all that. It's a huge expansion over the next 15 years of places. The universities are going to have to pull their finger out and find the new training places. Yeah. So it's going to be a pretty slow burn, I think, to get started. How quick can we get people on the wards? Well, medical training is going to be cut. Basic medical training is going to be cut from 5 years to 4. I think the BMA are probably going to have something to say about that. But providing the GMC, the General Medical Council, the regulators agree, I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't do it. There are lots of more modern training methods now. Nurses are coming onto the wards now in an apprentice way. At the moment, it's a very small percent. They're looking for a quarter of nurses to come on as apprentices, very much like what I imagine some of our older listeners will recognise as state-enrolled nurses training on the wards. That, I think, is a good thing. How much? Well, we've covered the 2.4 billion. So let's see what Labour say about that. And how do we keep them? There's a big chapter on retention. We're losing too many people because the work has just become exhausting. Providing we can sort of motivate people by the fact that cavalry is coming over the hill and there is help, and there'll be greater flexibility in rotas and things like that, then I think the plan will have done its job. Right. So we waited a long time for this. First time in 20 years, the nation's biggest employer has had a workforce plan, which is amazing, really. But it's a good start.
And just to remind people, of course, Roy, you were at the coalface, an NHS administrator trying to cope with these problems. But just to pick up on your point there of retention, Catherine Forster, our own correspondent, asking the Prime Minister the question about pay. No indication about pay deals or pay structures or anything in this agreement. And, of course, we've got the doctors and the consultants about to take action. Is that going to be the weakness in the plan?
Well, it's certainly a flaw. It's a fly in the ointment, let's put it that way, of the NHS. I mean, I don't think the consultants are going to get much popular support from the public. People earning over 80 grand a year and doing private practice. I think the public are going to say, really? As far as the junior doctors are concerned, well, they're asking for 35%. No one thinks they're going to get 35%. I expect they will settle for a 3-year deal, probably 5%, 5% and 5%. And again, what the big issue here is we're 18 months out from a general election, and it's highly possible we're going to have a complete change of gear and a change of government. So the real issue is, the question is, what are Labour going to do about this?
OK, Roy, stay with us. We're just going to get back to Tom and get another view about the political aspect of this in terms of it's not just this government. As Roy says, it's going to be maybe a Labour government that are going to implement this.
It certainly is. But the interesting thing, I think, at the front of that press conference, just before it started, we saw not only the Health Secretary walk in, Steve Barclay, but also Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. Now, of course, he was famously Health Secretary under the Cameron government, but then he became chair of the Health Select Committee right up and through the pandemic. And as chair of the Health Select Committee, he did a lot of work on retention. He even wrote a book about how to get excess deaths, what are they called, avoidable deaths, down to zero. And it seems that Jeremy Hunt's fingerprints are over this as much as Steve Barclay's or the rest of the NHS's. That's a really interesting point because it means that the funding is very, very important there. Perhaps these are plans, and the Labour Party has already indicated that it would want to follow very similar fiscal plans to the Conservative Party. Perhaps this is something that Wes Streeting and his colleagues in the Labour Party can get on board with.
Well, I mean, Wes Streeting saying, you know,
you stole
you've nicked our idea.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Roy, thank you as well for your analysis. And, of course, more coming up in terms of a reaction to what Professor Stephen Power said was this landmark day for the NHS. We're going through all the details for you again. Stay with us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the big green, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The scenes from Paris as a third night of violence rocks France following the fatal police shooting of a 17-year-old boy. Nearly 900 people have been arrested, nearly 250 police injured, and Marseille has just banned all public demonstrations.
Here, the Prime Minister unveils a huge overhaul of the NHS, hailed as a landmark day for the health service. But no word on pay. Is it a successful prescription for an ailing patient?
Will Birmingham go bust? The City Council has to find up to £760 million to meet historic pay claims. And the bill is growing by 14 million every month. We're live in the city of 1,000 trades and quite a few pay claims.
Also coming up from court, the accusations that one of the biggest stars in Hollywood is a sexual bully. The latest as Kevin Spacey faces charges of sexual assault, which he denies. First, the latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1:01. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has set out the government's 15-year plan to boost NHS staffing in England. It's being described as the most radical reform of the NHS in its 75-year history. But no word on pay. The 151-page plan aims to plug shortages of over 300,000 staff in England. It includes more university places for medical and nursing students, as well as a greater emphasis on apprenticeships. With £2.4 billion worth of funding over 5 years, Rishi Sunak says it focuses on 3 key areas that need reforming.
This is the NHS's own plan, and the government is proud to back it. Funding the expansion of education and training for the first 5 years in full, with over £2.4 billion of additional investment. You can trust this government with the NHS. The plan rests on 3 principles: train, retain and reform.
Well, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says only Labour knows how to fix the NHS.
After 13 years of catastrophic mismanagement of the NHS, which has bred the worst crisis in its history, I'm not surprised the Conservatives are looking to Labour and taking our workforce plan and running with it. I'm sure the country will do that at the next general election too. Labour's got a strong record on the NHS, the shortest waiting times, the highest patient satisfaction in history. And now we've got to build on this workforce plan to go even further.
Rishi Sunak says Lord Zach Goldsmith resigned as a minister after refusing to apologise for his criticism of a Commons investigation into Boris Johnson's Partygate probe. The Prime Minister says Lord Goldsmith's comments about the Privileges Committee were incompatible with his position as a minister. In his resignation letter, Lord Goldsmith accused the government of climate change apathy, saying it made his role as Minister for International Environment untenable. In France, authorities have arrested 875 people following a third night of riots in towns and cities across the country. 249 police officers were injured during last night's riots. Protesters are demanding justice for the 17-year-old, known only as Nahel M., who was shot dead by police after he failed to stop his car in Nanterre on Tuesday. The officer who fired the shot has apologised to the family. He's been charged with voluntary homicide. President Emmanuel Macron has been holding a second crisis meeting following the riots. Police have launched a double murder investigation after a teenager and a 23-year-old man were stabbed in Islington in North London last night. A third victim was also found with a stab wound. His condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. No arrests have been made. Police believe a large number of people were present when the attack took place and are urging witnesses to come forward. The energy regulator says it's great news that people will see their bills drop by £460 a year from tomorrow. Ofgem says it's taken a range of steps to stabilise the market and protect consumers. However, bills will remain a lot higher than they were 2 years ago, £800 more expensive. That's almost double. The regulator's urging people who are struggling to make payments to reach out to their suppliers as soon as possible. The lawsuit by the Duke of Sussex, among others, against Mirror Group newspapers over allegations of phone hacking is due to conclude today. The trial is over alleged unlawful information gathering between 1996 and 2011. The Mirror Group denies any wrongdoing. And a court has been told Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey is a sexual bully who delights in making others feel uncomfortable. During his trial at Southwark Crown Court, prosecutors described the Hollywood star as a man who sexually assaults other men. The actor faces 12 charges of sex offences against 4 men, which allegedly took place between 2001 and 2013. He denies the charges against him. A new jail has opened in Leicester to help reduce crime as well as boosting the local economy. HMP Fossway, the prison, has an innovative security measures and also plans to help prisoners find work. It's environmentally too. The Justice Secretary says it's part of a more extensive prison building programme. And the King will receive a special sword named the Elizabeth when he visits Edinburgh next week. King Charles will be presented with the sword before a Thanksgiving service at St Giles's Cathedral on Wednesday. The Elizabeth, inspired by Thistles and Scotland's landscape, replaces the deteriorating Sword of State. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Mark and Pip.
Breaking news, and French President Emmanuel Macron is in crisis talks this lunchtime after nearly 900 people were arrested after a third night of rioting right across France. Several hundred police were injured, and the city of Marseille has just announced a ban on all public demonstrations after those disturbances spread to many French cities.
Indeed, and that's what's concerning, of course, the French authorities, that it's not just Paris, that there have been outbreaks, as you can see, from the north to the west and east, and even as far south as Pau there in the Pyrenees, and that really has alarmed the French government, with all this violence sparked by the fatal police shooting of 17-year-old Nahel M. of Algerian descent during a traffic stop, and the policeman is now in custody. Well, Nahel's funeral expected to be held tomorrow, and of course we'll have more on that. But let's have an indication now from Paul Hawkins and what many are calling France's George Floyd moment.
Justice for Nahel, they chant. His mother Mounia, with the blonde hair and the white T-shirt in the middle, surrounded by family, friends and supporters as they marched through Nanterre yesterday.
He is a young boy. He's very kind. He's not evil. He's not a thug. What the media are saying about him is not true. We're not contradicting the legal or police procedure. Yes, he was driving a car without a license. He tried to flee, but he should not be killed. That's all. They shouldn't have fired.
In 2017, the number of situations in which French police could use firearms was widened to include traffic stops. It stated that officers can open fire if a vehicle refuses in order to stop, and its occupants are likely to pose a risk to their life or physical safety or to other people's. Since then, official statistics show the majority of victims of lethal police shootings during a traffic stop are either black or Arab. Nahel was reportedly French-Algerian.
I think our police are tired. Our police need training. Our police need more people. They're exhausted, and it gets even more out of hand. And within this same police, there is racism, and we absolutely have to fight that.
So what happened on Tuesday? Police say a yellow BMW with 3 people inside was stopped for erratic driving and because of the driver's young age. He refused to stop, ran a red light before stopping in traffic. Officers caught up with it, and when Nahel refused to stop again, he was shot dead. The officer who opened fire is under investigation for murder, or what the French call voluntary homicide. Nanterre's prosecutor has already called the killing unlawful. The question is, was the use of force proportionate? The police investigation continues. But this is another George Floyd moment for France, another police killing. Famous French motto, liberté, égalité, fraternité, means liberty, equality and fraternity. But Nahel's death has only reinforced the view amongst many ethnic minorities in France that only 2/3 of that motto are true. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
GB News Home and Security editor Mark White can bring us now the very latest. President Macron, as we speak, is chairing those crisis talks. There has been suggestions that France could be in a state of emergency.
Yes, it's certainly possible. He pulled out of the European summit in Brussels early to get back to chair this crisis meeting. We're told from sources in the meeting that he is saying he's prepared to do whatever is required to get a grip with this situation, which the map that you were showing earlier indicates just how widespread this is. Right across the country, north, south, east and west, more than 10 major centres of population that have been struck by violence, now running into the third day. And most of the very significant trouble is around Paris itself, but also in the southern city of Marseille. We've had actually the mayor in Marseille and local authorities there announcing that there will be a ban on demonstrations, public gatherings, that public transport in the city will be suspended from 7 o'clock. There's some incredible footage shot on a mobile phone that shows a public library in Marseille that has been torch set ablaze by the rioters in that city. It is a very, very tense situation in Marseille as we speak.
And in terms of Nanterre, this suburb of Paris, the mayor of Nanterre, Patrick Jarry, was at this meeting, and he said that he wanted to be there to convey the emotion and anger felt by residents of this particular town or part of Paris, shared, he said, in all its diversity, and indicating that the funeral now will be tomorrow, attended by the mother, and one wonders what sort of spark or flashpoint that might provide.
Well, it could go one of two ways. Sometimes these events, in terms of the funeral, can be a bit cathartic.
Yeah.
You can have family members calling out for calm and peace.
And certainly Mounia did that yesterday,
well.
didn't she, on that white march in the city?
I mean, what you also have, and we've seen it time and again with riots that spread, is often very young people that are just caught up in the excitement, the testosterone and the adrenaline of people that just want a good scrap, and sadly. And that's what you're seeing with widespread looting that's taking place.
Yeah.
In
What you were
towns and
talking
cities.
about, actually, Mark, in Marseille, I think we can now show you pictures. Just tell us again what you were saying about what happened.
Yeah, well, you can see this is the main public library in Marseille, and just torched and very badly damaged by fire in that city as well. As I say, you know, throughout France, many centres of population now experiencing very significant disorder. Now, we're told that of the 875 people that have been arrested, a very significant number, arrested in 3 days of rioting, half of those are in the Paris area. So most of the rioting, certainly for the first couple of days, was centred on Paris. It has now spread out, but half those arrested in the Paris area, and most of those arrested, we're told, all of those arrested, are ranging in age from 13 to 18.
Gosh,
so that gives you an
young,
indication
disaffected
of the demographic out there.
The reports that are coming out at the moment suggest that it's currently looting of shops, attacks on public buildings. I think there was a Molotov cocktail that was thrown at a police station. That seems to be happening more at the moment, rather than sort of pitched running battles with police. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, in terms of the... Sorry, I'm just slightly distracted because I think Emmanuel Macron has been speaking now, saying that after this crisis meeting, saying that all violence is unjustifiable and attempting to try to destabilise our state is apparently what the French president is saying. He said, our response has been reactive and adaptive. This is just a rough translation that we're getting from him speaking at the moment.
And the French Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, at that same meeting saying that all options were being considered to stop the unrest. Now, we've got this question about the state of emergency. The last time you were indicating that happened was back in 2015, the Charlie Hebdo problems in Paris, and previous to that, 2005, when we had a similar situation in terms of the North African youngsters in these various suburbs of Paris.
Yeah, I mean, there was some understanding initially after the state of emergency was introduced after Charlie Hebdo.
Macron speaking now. Let's just bring that in. He is speaking in French. We'll try and give you a translation as it comes in. So Emmanuel Macron also saying that
many of the events that were due to take place in a number of centres of population have been cancelled to be able to protect people and to be able to protect property, as we are, of course, in the middle of a very ongoing and serious security situation. He said that all parents need to take responsibility for their children. This an indication, of course, of the fact that of those arrested, they are ranging from 13 to 18, the vast majority of them. So an indication, as I say, of the demographic, very young indeed, of those who are involved in the worst of this rioting, or at least those who are being arrested following the rioting. Also saying that, well, he's confirming that here. He says a third of those arrested were children, described by him. And he said, we've seen how the social media is playing a part in orchestrating the violence. Now, that's interesting because we've been hearing about this. There's apparently an app that many people are accessing that's giving us sort of an indication of where pockets of violence are breaking out, so that people are reacting and responding and heading to those areas in quick time.
As a result, right. And it's interesting, on that very note, the Mayor of Toulouse, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, saying it's a tiny minority behind these disturbances and they're being encouraged by far-left extremists. Well, whether that's the case or not, clearly there is something going on in terms of the not coordination, but in terms of the reaction on social media to these events.
Yeah, absolutely. He's also saying that they will work with the social media platforms to stop them being used in this way. Now, how far they get with regard to any cooperation from these big tech giants is another matter, because they have often proved very resistant to government interference.
The camera here just breaking away just to explain. We'll try and get back to that key meeting.
British tourists, they are also being warned of the unrest, the disruption. The British Foreign Office is urging people to avoid protests and to monitor the media.
Yes, well, understandably so, because Paris, for instance, just as one centre of population which is being very badly affected by this, attracts many thousands of visitors from the UK, particularly at this time of the year. So not just from the UK, all around the world, many visitors in France will be potentially caught up in this, certainly disrupted by what is going on in terms of the security operation here. And if we get to a state of emergency, well, that involves a curfew, potentially. That involves restrictions on public gatherings. If you're a tourist and you're stuck in your hotel, it's not going to be very nice.
And it's interesting, of course, that we've had, 5 weeks of protests over the pension reforms. this had been talked about at that stage. It wasn't instituted. And, of course, I guess in terms of Macron, it is almost an admittance of failure when he's got a political challenge from the far right, Marine Le Pen particularly, who are quite vocal on what's actually happening on the streets at the moment.
Yes, and on that point, some breaking news of the far right obviously calling for a state of emergency. Macron has said, or at least it's being reported from that meeting, that no state of emergency has been declared yet. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't be at some point, but at the moment, they have not gone and decided to push the button on a state of emergency.
Just explain to us the mechanics as well of what's been going on, because the French themselves have indicated that when we talk about police, it is a very different picture to here in Britain, for instance, where you've effectively got a paramilitary force in terms of the riot police, the gendarmes and so on, who may well react very differently in terms of these public sort of demonstrations and protests as to what we might see here in London, for instance.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can see for those on television, I'll explain to radio listeners that we've been seeing from these pictures, though police officers involved from CRS, those public
police,
order trained police specialists, that they've been using water cannon. We don't use that in this country. There was an attempt by one Boris Johnson
to buy a surplus water truck,
when he was London mayor, but I think it was blocked by Theresa May, if I remember
right. I think
rightly.
it didn't work anyway, I seem to remember.
So we don't use water cannon, certainly here in what we describe loosely as the mainland. In Northern Ireland, they do have water cannon. What we don't do as well is fire tear gas in the UK at protesters. That is something that the riot police, the public order trained CRS and other police officers attending these major demonstrations and riots do as a matter of course. That is, for them, a tried and tested tactic. We see it with those police officers who line up and they fire a volley of CS gas into the crowds, and it usually has the desired effect of getting crowds to scatter, to run back, but of course they often just regroup, mass in another area and continue their rioting.
We've just seen President Macron speaking there, holding these crisis talks this lunchtime. He has come in for a little bit of stick, though, hasn't he, or a lot of stick, for being at an Elton John concert when this rioting was taking place. I think we have a picture of him.
Yes,
with the singer.
So this wasn't last night. So to be fair to him, it wasn't after the third night or during the third night of rioting. It was, though, during the second nights of rioting. So we'd had this terrible incident and some very serious rioting, particularly around Paris. Then a second night of rioting was underway as he was attending this concert. It's not a great look for the head of state to be looking as though he's just relaxing and enjoying himself while key parts of his country and certainly the capital city burn and are plagued by very significant disorder.
Let's talk about the policeman involved. He is in custody, awaiting a court appearance, charged with voluntary homicide. And we were told that the guidelines, if you like, for the police were changed back in 2017, and that they may well have the capability within the law of discharging a weapon or a firearm if someone drives off.
Yeah, this is a very interesting point. So there was a quite notorious incident in France in 2017 when a police officer in one of the suburbs was driving his patrol car. He was attacked by a gang of youths throwing Molotov cocktails at his vehicle, petrol bombs at his vehicle. He was very badly burned in that incident. And the police unions at that time demanded action from the French government. Remember as well, we had a spate of terrorist incidents where police officers and civilians were being targeted by Islamist extremists, Charlie Hebdo and others.
And the Bataclan attack, of course, in Paris,
on the back of that, the government agreed to a 5-point plan that gave police officers sort of 5 potential scenarios where they could open fire. And one of those scenarios was if a vehicle refused to stop, took off, but the officer had to be sure that then he perceived
due cause, if you like.
That people were potentially at risk of injury or more serious harm from an individual taking off. It doesn't mean that anybody taking off from a checkpoint
can be shot.
But if the officer perceives that there is a significant risk and that people may well be injured or worse, then they could potentially open fire. That certainly will be the defence of this officer going forward.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for taking us through that crisis meeting. We have to say is over, but of course we'll update you as we get more from France on that.
Do stay with us here on GB News. We are talking about this landmark announcement for the NHS. The Prime Minister announcing a huge overhaul. It's been hailed as a landmark day. We will bring you the latest from Downing Street.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Earlier on GB News Radio.
Music we were getting was they were fairly confident.
Well, let's welcome you back to the live desk and update you on what we heard as a landmark day for the health service with this announcement at Downing Street. Record numbers of doctors, nurses, dentists, other healthcare staff to be trained in England as part of a £2.4 billion workforce plan over the 5 years, indeed 15 years in total for the entire service.
The plan aims to create more university places for medical and nursing students, apprenticeship schemes for doctors and potential for shorter medical degrees.
Well, the need is to prevent the estimated shortage of 360,000 NHS staff by 2037. Let's speak to our political reporter, Catherine Foster, who was there in Downing Street and indeed asked the Prime Minister a question about pay, because that was the thing that was missing, of course, in these, 151 pages odd.
Yes, interesting, wasn't it? They had a lot of announcements to make. Rishi Sunak on very upbeat form, flanked by Amanda Pritchard, who's the NHS Chief Executive for England, and also Steve Powers, who's the National Medical Director. But nothing about pay. So I asked about one of his 5 priorities. They're standing there with this cut waiting lists emblazoned on the podium. That's one of his 5 priorities. I asked if he was confident, giving waiting lists are currently at a 7.4 million record high, of actually being able to deliver on that priority and indeed the other 4 that he's pledged. He said he was. I think it's going to be very difficult given the looming 5-day junior doctor strike and the fact that consultants have also now voted to strike. But certainly a lot in this long-term plan that will be welcomed. First of all, the fact that it even exists. We've had plenty of NHS plans before, but this is the first really long-term workforce plan that indeed we have had. They said 3 key focuses, which were train, retain and reform. As you've heard on training, they're going to double the number of places at medical school. They're potentially going to make it a year quicker to train to become a doctor. They're going to have far more degree apprenticeships, meaning that people can be working in the NHS and contributing and earning money at the same time. And then a lot about reform as well, a lot about the use of technology, about the use of AI, about having more use of pharmacies, greater access to cloud telephony, they call it, when you ring up to the GP rather than spending half an hour waiting on this, loop of not being able to get through. That the technology is there to make these things easier, and stressing the part that tech can play. Also saying they really want to, as far as possible, keep people out of hospitals, treat them in the community. Nothing about social care, though, of course. And as we know, Boris Johnson promised a plan for social care. We're still waiting. And of course, the crisis in social care has a very direct impact on the NHS, because there's many elderly people stuck in hospital, costing the NHS a large sum of money, who simply can't be let out because there isn't the care in place in the community. So a positive day, a positive step forward, but very immediate problems with strikes, etc., that I think are going to be very, very difficult. And I think we're in for a bumpy ride over the coming months.
A positive day, Catherine, but as you would expect, opposition parties already having a bit of a pop, and the Liberal Democrats, they have said we could have had this plan a very long time ago, and it's been delayed due to all the Tory chaos and infighting.
Well, yes, and of course, Rishi Sunak hasn't been PM for very long, but the Conservatives have been in office for 13 years. So some people will say, yes, what's taken you so long? And Labour have basically said they've come along and nicked Labour's plan, because Labour have been asking for medical places to be doubled for quite a while.
Catherine at Downing Street, thank you very much indeed for that. Coming up, the final day of evidence in the Prince Harry hacking case. We'll dial in to the High Court. First, the headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has set out the government's 15-year plan to boost NHS staffing in England. The 151-page blueprint aims to plug shortages of over 300,000 staff in England. It includes more university places for medical and nursing students, as well as greater emphasis on apprenticeships. Rishi Sunak says it focuses on 3 key areas that need reforming.
This is the NHS's own plan, and the government is proud to back it. funding the expansion of education and training for the first 5 years in full, with over £2.4 billion of additional investment. You can trust this government with the NHS. The plan rests on 3 principles: train, retain and reform.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak says Lord Zach Goldsmith resigned as a minister after refusing to apologise for his criticism of a Commons investigation into Boris Johnson's Partygate probe. The Prime Minister says Lord Goldsmith's comments about the Privileges Committee were incompatible with his position as a minister. In his resignation letter, Lord Goldsmith accused the government of climate change apathy, saying it made his role as Minister for International Environment untenable. And in France, President Emmanuel Macron has been holding a second crisis meeting following the riots across the country. Authorities have arrested 875 people after a third night of rioting, with 249 police officers injured. Protesters are demanding justice for the 17-year-old, known only as Nahel M., who was shot dead by police after he failed to stop his car in Nanterre on Tuesday. The officer who fired the shot has been charged with voluntary homicide. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2650 and €1.1649. The price of gold is £1,506.09 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,525 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
And welcome back to the live desk. And Prince Harry, back in the headlines today, his long-running case against Mirror Group newspapers due to conclude at the High Court.
The Duke of Sussex and several other claimants, including Coronation Street star Michael Lavelle, Nikki Sanderson and Fiona Whiteman, have accused the newspaper of phone hacking and unlawful information gathering.
Let's get more with our royal correspondent Cameron Walker, who's outside the court for us. And Cameron, even though it concludes today, we probably won't be hearing from the judge for some time. I'm just looking at what Mr Justice Fancourt's got to wade through, because there are dozens of other claims brought by others against MGN, including Ricky Tomlinson, the actor, George Michael's estate, Ian Wright, the former footballer, and even girls allowed singer Cheryl. I mean, it's a huge list he's got to get through and deal with.
Yeah, it's a huge list of high-profile figures, and each of those high-profile figures has a number of articles to wade through. The Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, for example, 33 articles which contain alleged unlawful information gathering are being tested in this trial. And Prince Harry, of course, earlier this month became the first British royal since the 19th century to physically be in a courtroom to give evidence in front of the world's media. But this morning, the case is very much wrapping up here. But Prince Harry's lawyers were dealt a bit of a blow by the judge this morning, and that is because last minute they tried to submit further evidence which has recently come to light, either late last night or this morning, and it relates to a letter sent to the judge by one of the journalists who wrote one of the articles in which is being tested in this case, where Prince Harry alleges unlawful information activity took place in order to write this article. And now David Sherborne, who is Prince Harry's lawyer, says this letter contains direct evidence in relation to the particular origin of the information of which the article has been complained about by Prince Harry. It relates to voice note interception, allegedly carried out post-2006 and related to the Duke of Sussex. Now, the judge asked him, why is this being brought to evidence so late? When you wrapped up your evidence last week, there has to be an end point. Now, David Sherborne, in response to that, said the reason being is because it is very relevant. It directly relates to questions that your lordships needs to determine. In other words, it could help the judge to decide whether or not Prince Harry is a victim of unlawful information activity. Now, the judge asked him to clarify, are you just wanting to submit the letter, or are you wanting to bring this particular journalist forward as a witness at this late stage? Now, David Sherborne said it's just the letter that he wants to submit to the judge, and the judge in response says that this is an extremely optimistic application. There has to be a limit on when evidence can be submitted. We're on the last day of closing arguments, and the judge put it to David Sherborne, what happens if another letter is submitted to you on Monday, for example? Now, Andrew Green, Casey, who's representing Mirror Group newspapers, he agreed with the judge and said that evidence has been brought too late. And he also says that that what's contained in the letter does not have an element of truth to it. Now, David Sherborne asked the judge to read the letter before weighing up whether or not it can be used as evidence for open justice. Now, Andrew Green also said, who is the Casey representing Mirror Group newspapers, that this is an attempt to get evidence through the back door. And he also said to the judge, once you've read that letter, you cannot unread it. Now, David Sherborne said the judge is experienced enough to be able to read something on principle before weighing up whether or not it can be used in evidence. Well, the judge made his decision and he said, I'm not going to entertain this any further. It's a letter to the court. There's an issue about privilege. It's wrong in principle. It wouldn't be fair on the defendant not to be able to question the journalist on its contents. This has been submitted 10 days after your evidence closed. I cannot entertain this at this late stage. I will not read the letter, and I will not admit it as evidence. But what's going on in court right now is Andrew Green KC, representing Mirror Group newspapers, is going through his closing arguments in this case. This afternoon, David Sherborne, representing Prince Harry, and the other high-profile claimants will have his chance to put forward his final closing arguments before the trial wraps up here this afternoon, and then the judge is expected to make his final ruling at a later date.
Cameron Walker, thank you for taking us through all that.
Back to Cameron, of course, a little later as we get those final closing speeches. But let's reflect now on the cost of living, putting pressure, of course, on everyone's disposable income. Inflation, of course, now dragging people into ever higher tax bands.
This stealth tax, known as fiscal drag, means households will be left with less to spend each month, as not only will shopping cost more, but they will also be paying more in income tax.
Well, the latest figures released by the taxman revealing the extent to which such figures are rising. Let's turn to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Fiscal drag's a real drag.
It certainly is. And what do we mean by fiscal drag? It's pretty simple, really. When you have a tax threshold, say the start where you start paying tax, if you start paying income tax, believe it or not, if you earn more than £12,570, right?
That's your personal allowance.
That's your personal allowance. If you freeze that, but then you have inflation and your wages go up, more and more of your wage and more people are dragged into above that threshold. It's the same at the top rate of tax. And what's happened today is that HMRC, the taxman, as we say, has released figures on how many more people are going to be dragged into paying income tax in the first place and into these upper tax brackets. Let's have a look at some of the numbers here. Now, under Rishi Sunak and then under Jeremy Hunt, they froze these tax thresholds until 2028. Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, froze them until 2026. Then Jeremy Hunt added 2 more years. Now, they've been frozen at a starting rate of tax, the personal threshold of £12,570, and then you start paying the higher rate of, and you pay tax at 20% above that, and you pay the higher rate, 40%, above £50,270. So they're the thresholds. Now, because of inflation and increases in wages, when the thresholds are frozen, someone who's on £20,000 a year, which isn't bad, obviously, a regular wage, they're going to pay £870 more in tax. Without the rate of tax going up, that's the point. The rate stays where it is. It stays at 20%. They don't think taxes have risen, but they're going to end up paying a lot more tax because of fiscal drag. And slightly higher up the income schedule, 5.6 million people are now going to be paying the higher rate of tax. That's getting on for 20% of the workforce. These people aren't wealthy. And that's 41% more people then will be paying tax at the higher rate, even though the rates of income tax haven't changed. That's why we call it a stealth tax.
So these people who are effectively middle-income earners are being pushed into the bracket of the super wealthy.
Exactly, Pip. We're talking middling teachers, not particularly senior teachers, police officers paying the top rate of tax, some nurses paying the top rate of tax. The top rate of tax was not designed for these, with huge respect to them, regular, run-of-the-mill people. You don't have to be a top ritzy-ditzy executive now to be paying the top rate of tax. And the top rate of tax is 40 pence in the pound. And then you've got national insurance on top of that.
There is another rate band, of course, and that's 45%.
There's the additional rate.
And now a lot of the, perhaps senior NHS consultants, for instance, are paying more because that's come down to 125,000.
Exactly right.
So they've actually changed the tax rate.
I didn't get into that in the graphic because it's a little bit complicated, but you're exactly right. So you've got the threshold at about 12.5 grand. You've got the top rate of tax. They call it the top rate of tax. It isn't the top one because there's another one. But the top rate of tax is just over 50 grand. The additional rate was above 150 grand, so proper money.
No, 125.
But then they lowered that to 125. So now look, I'm a highly qualified economist, right? You two are very smart people. We're spending quite a lot of time on daytime television trying to explain this. And we're 3 professional broadcasters, and it's quite hard to explain, isn't it? Yeah. And this is why the politicians do it, because they think we're too thick to understand.
Do I take it that there might be more on this in the Sunday Telegraph this coming week?
Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see, Mark, won't we? But, you know, some people say to me, how come you can explain this stuff on telly? The reason I can is because I write about it. When you write about it, you really have to work it out in your head. And I'm absolutely determined. Yeah? It's up to the British government. They're elected. If they want to raise taxes, you know, fill your boots.
But be upfront about it.
Don't do it in a way that you expect people not to understand.
Should we just reflect that, you know, we talk about the current government. This was something Gordon Brown instituted when he was a Labour chancellor.
He was the master of fiscal drag, the absolute master of fiscal drag. And the problem with it is that people don't... If the top rate of tax goes up or the basic rate of income tax goes up, it's on the front page of every newspaper for a week. Yeah. It's a major constitutional issue. And yet, this has much, much, much more effect. That 870 quid on 20 grand, that's the equivalent of like a 4p rise in the basic rate of income tax. And who's going to notice?
It just keeps coming at people, doesn't it, from all sides?
Exactly.
Week after
all
week.
All sides.
Liam, thank you.
Talking of which...
Birmingham City Council is locked in talks with the government after revealing it has to pay up to £760 million to settle equal pay claims. The Labour-run council has already paid out £1.1 billion to settle claims after a ruling at the Supreme Court 11 years ago.
But now, after the implementation of a new IT system, analysis has revealed huge additional costs on councils still needing to pay out on various deals, the local authority admitting they don't have that money. So, is it the fact that they could go bust? Let's get more with our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson joining us. Because, Jack, I think you've made the estimate that the longer this goes on, it's another 14 million every month.
Yeah, that's right. So this liability increases by £5 to £14 million every month. Just to give a bit of context of where these claims kind of come from, you mentioned there that 2012 Supreme Court ruling. It was brought forward after hundreds of people, mostly women, came forward. They were in jobs such as teaching assistants, cleaners and catering staff. They claimed and were eventually ruled in favour of missing out on bonuses that were going to typically male-dominated jobs such as refuse collectors and street cleaners. So those claims which have been brought forward over the past 10 years, £1.1 billion is councillors currently paid out. But alongside this, there has been this implementation of this new financial and database system. That is over budget, the council admits, and also there's been lots of different problems from that system. That has meant that earlier in this year, they decided to do fresh analysis with the system on these equal pay claims, and that's where they found this black hole basically of up to £760 million that they've still got to pay. Now, the council has had to go into negotiations with the government and their financial auditors because they say that they don't have the money within this year's budget or their reserves to be able to pay this liability off, and so they are having to go with the government to find a solution. The government, they do say that this is one of the biggest challenges that they've ever faced, and they apologise for their failure to get this situation under control. But the local Conservative leader here and the leader of the opposition, Robert Alden, says the council have known about this issue for a while.
And we're really concerned about the impact it could have on those most vulnerable people in the city. And that's why we're calling on the council to now start coming clean about what they're considering, what the impact's going to be, and work with opposition groups on the council to actually try and get this resolved. Because we've been warning them about what the issues are, but the Birmingham Labour Cabinet refused to listen, and now Birmingham taxpayers are going to be paying the price for years to come of their failure. Even Labour Cabinet members were tweeting that they felt there was an issue, but they didn't do anything about it. And to put it into context, it's like your neighbour stopping you and telling you you've got a broken tile on your roof, but instead of fixing the roof, you just hope it doesn't rain. And that's what the Labour Council's done here. They've hoped the problem would go away, and now Birmingham taxpayers are being hit with a £760 million bill because of it. People looking at Birmingham will be worried about exactly what a Labour government would do in this country if they keep repeating the kind of behaviour we've seen here in Birmingham, where they're running up bills, unable to pay them, leaving valuable services that are needed by vulnerable people at risk.
Well, with this equal pay debt and, of course, the over budget of that financial and database system, the Birmingham Conservatives here are now calling on the Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources on this council here, Bridget Jones, to resign. And, of course, the impact of this problem and this gap in the finances for this council is that if they can't reach a solution with the government, they may well have to issue a Section 114 notice. That essentially is where a council admits it can't reach its financial liabilities, and the government could well come in to take control of this council if a solution can't be found.
Jack Carson in Birmingham, thank you very much for that.
Of course, we'll keep you updated on extraordinary figures coming out there from Birmingham. Now, a sexual bully and a predator who took pleasure in groping young men. Those are the words used by the prosecution to describe actor Kevin Spacey in the opening statements at Southwark Crown Court today.
The two-time Oscar winner is accused of sexual offences against 4 men and denies 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 of causing a person to engage in penetrative sexual activity.
Let's get more from outside court now. Speak to our London reporter Lisa Hartle. It's pretty dramatic evidence being put to the jury there.
Yeah, the actor Kevin Spacey left here just over half an hour ago. Whilst he was in court today, he seemed relaxed. He was making notes whilst the prosecution made their opening arguments. The actor, best known for films such as American Beauty and Netflix's House of Cards, faces 12 charges relating to 4 men. The charges allegedly took place between 2001 and 2013. Much of the alleged offending took place at a time when Kevin Spacey was the creative director at the Old Vic Theatre in London. Now, the charges he is facing are 3 counts of indecent assault, 7 counts of sexual assault, 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent, and 1 count of causing a person to engage in penetrative sexual activity without consent. In the opening statement, the prosecution claims Spacey is a sexual bully, a man who doesn't respect personal boundaries or space, who seems to delight in making others feel powerless and uncomfortable. The jury also heard details of the allegations that the 4 men have made. The prosecution alleged that one of the complainants was assaulted after writing to Mr. Spacey for mentoring. He went to his flat, fell asleep, and they say he woke to Kevin Spacey sexually assaulting him. The prosecution told jurors to concentrate on the evidence and to not become starstruck by the actor's fame. Now, the defence also addressed the jury, briefly telling them that they'll get insights into fame and how people change once you're famous, telling them Mr. Spacey was rich and influential, asking what did these complainants want. He also asked them, has Mr. Spacey been left vulnerable to opportunists by coming out as gay? The trial is expected to last 4 weeks, with evidence being given on Monday, and Kevin Spacey strenuously denies all charges.
Lisa, thank you very much indeed for updating us. Of course, we will follow the various events at that trial. Thank you for the moment.
In the next hour, do stay with us here on the live desk on GB News. We will have the very latest from Paris after President Macron holds crisis meetings to tackle the riots and the violence that are rocking France.
And we now know that the funeral of Naël M, the 17-year-old, will be taking place tomorrow. We'll have all the latest live for you from France. Stay with us here on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc. That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The scenes from Paris as a third night of violence rocks France following the fatal police shooting of a 17-year-old boy. More than 800 people have been arrested. Marseille has just banned all public demonstrations. But President Macron has just said he will not be declaring a state of emergency yet.
Here, the Prime Minister unveils a huge overhaul of the NHS, hailed as a landmark day for the health service. But no word on pay. Is it a successful prescription for an ailing patient?
Will Birmingham go bust? The City Council has to find up to £760 million to meet historic pay claims. And the bill is growing by 14 million every month. We'll be live in the city of 1,000 trades and quite a few pay claims.
Also coming up on the live desk, a lawyer and a judge clash in the Prince Harry trial over a letter introduced as evidence at the very last minute. It's not being accepted in the High Court on the final day of proceedings. We'll have the latest from there. First, though, the headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has set out the government's 15-year plan to boost NHS staffing in England. The 151-page blueprint aims to plug shortages of over 300,000 staff in England. It includes more university places for medical and nursing students, as well as greater emphasis on apprenticeships. Rishi Sunak says it focuses on 3 key areas that need reforming.
This is the NHS's own plan, and the government is proud to back it. Funding the expansion of education and training for the first 5 years in full, with over £2.4 billion of additional investment. You can trust this government with the NHS. The plan rests on 3 principles: train, retain and reform.
The Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, meanwhile, says only Labour knows how to fix the NHS.
After 13 years of catastrophic mismanagement of the NHS, which has bred the worst crisis in its history, I'm not surprised the Conservatives are looking to Labour and taking our workforce plan and running with it I'm sure the country will do that at the next general election too. Labour's got a strong record on the NHS, the shortest waiting times, the highest patient satisfaction in history. And now we've got to build on this workforce plan to go even further.
Lord Zac Goldsmith says he's happy to apologise for sharing his views on the Commons investigation into Boris Johnson's Partygate probe. The Tory peers hit back after Rishi Sunak said he'd refused to apologise, saying his comments about the Privileges Committee were incompatible with his position as a minister. Lord Goldsmith has now admitted he shouldn't have commented publicly. In his resignation letter, he accused the government of climate change apathy, saying it made his role as Minister for International Environment untenable. The UK has warned those travelling to France of disruption to transport, including possible curfews following riots across the country. President Emmanuel Macron has been holding a second crisis meeting after nearly 900 people were arrested during the third night of rioting. 249 police officers have been injured. Protesters are demanding justice for the 17-year-old known only as Nahel M, who was shot dead by police after he failed to stop his car in Nanterre on Tuesday. The officer who fired the shot has been charged with voluntary homicide. Back here, police have launched a double murder investigation after 2 people were killed in North London. A teenager believed to be 15 years old and a 23-year-old man were found with stab wounds in Islington last night. A third victim was also found with stab injuries. His condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. No arrests have been made. Police believe a large number of people were there when the attack happened and are urging witnesses to come forward. The energy regulator says it's great news that people will see their bills drop by £460 a year from tomorrow. Ofgem says it's taken a range of steps to stabilise the market and protect consumers. However, bills will remain a lot higher than they were 2 years ago, £800 more expensive. That's almost double. The regulator is urging people who are struggling to make payments to reach out to their suppliers as soon as possible. The lawsuit by the Duke of Sussex, among others, against Mirror Group newspapers over allegations of phone hacking is due to conclude today. The trial's over alleged unlawful information gathering between 1996 and 2011. The Mirror Group denies any wrongdoing. And a court has been told Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey allegedly made a series of advances on 4 men who didn't want to be touched by him in a sexual way. During his trial at Southwark Crown Court, prosecutors described the Hollywood star as a man who sexually assaults other men. The actor faces 12 charges of sex offences against 4 men, which allegedly took place between 2001 and 2013. He denies the charges against him. 16 million Brits will, from tomorrow, be able to live and work in Australia after the age limit for working holiday visas is raised from 30 to 35. The visa duration will also be extended from 2 to 3 years without the need for consecutive stays or farm work. The free trade agreement between the 2 countries enables similar arrangements for Australians to work and travel here in the UK. And the King will receive a special sword named the Elizabeth when he visits Edinburgh next week. King Charles will be presented with the sword before a Thanksgiving service at St Giles's Cathedral on Wednesday. The Elizabeth, inspired by thistles and Scotland's landscape, replaces the deteriorating Sword of State. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Mark and Pip.
Welcome back to the live desk. Well, within the last hour, the French President Emmanuel Macron has been talking after he held crisis talks. 900 people arrested in France after a third night of rioting. He's called the situation unacceptable and unjustifiable. He says more police will be deployed on the streets. Parents should keep their children at home, and social networks have their part to play in inflaming violence.
Yeah, the city of Marseille announcing a ban on all public demonstrations now after the disturbances spread across a number of French cities. We can bring you the map now to show you the various points of well, pretty violent protests now, sparked, of course, by the fatal police shooting of this 17-year-old Nahel M doing a traffic stop in a Paris suburb. Now, his funeral expected to be held tomorrow, we're told. His mother says she will be attending that. Paul Hawkins reports now on what appears to be an increasingly violent crisis across the country.
Justice for Nahel, they chant. His mother Mounia, with the blonde hair and the white T-shirt in the middle, surrounded by family, friends and supporters as they marched through Nanterre yesterday.
He is a young boy. He's very kind. He's not evil. He's not a thug. What the media are saying about him is not true. We're not contradicting the legal or police procedure. Yes, he was driving a car without a licence. He tried to flee, but he should not be killed. That's all. They shouldn't have fired.
In 2017, the number of situations in which French police could use firearms was widened to include traffic stops. It stated that officers can open fire if a vehicle refuses in order to stop, and its occupants are likely to pose a risk to their life or physical safety or to other people's. Since then, official statistics show the majority of victims of lethal police shootings during a traffic stop are either black or Arab. Nahel was reportedly French-Algerian.
I think our police are tired. Our police need training. Our police need more people. They're exhausted and it gets even more out of hand. And within this same police, there is racism, and we absolutely have to fight that.
So what happened on Tuesday? Police say a yellow BMW with 3 people inside was stopped for erratic driving and because of the driver's young age. He refused to stop, ran a red light before stopping in traffic. Officers caught up with it, and when Nahel refused to stop again, he was shot dead. The officer who opened fire is under investigation for murder, or what the French call voluntary homicide. Nanterre's prosecutor has already called the killing unlawful. The question is, was the use of force proportionate? The police investigation continues. But this is another George Floyd moment for France, another police killing. Famous French motto, liberté, égalité, fraternité, means liberty, equality and fraternity. But Nahel's death has only reinforced the view amongst many ethnic minorities in France that only 2/3 of that motto are true. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Let's get the latest with GB News Home and Security editor Mark White. President Macron speaking within the last hour. They are bracing themselves for a 4th night of violence, and you've just seen some very shocking footage of this.
Yes, indeed. This is footage that's now starting to circulate from the city of Oyonnax in eastern France, one of the larger cities in that part of the French Alps. And that footage shows individuals out on the street firing AK-47s, it seems like. Just have a listen to this and watch this. Now, we've no way of independently verifying that that is Oyonnax. However, there are other videos now emerging that appear to corroborate that. Let's have a look at this next piece of video.
Now, clearly, we got fireworks or firecrackers as well, and they're firing into the air. But the fact they've got access to these assault weapons, automatic assault weapons, this actually will be pretty alarming for the authorities.
Yeah, I mean, the sad fact is that in a number of French cities, there are criminal gangs, unlike in this country where it's a bit more difficult to get hold of these hardcore firearms, but criminal gangs that do regularly carry these very lethal weapons, AK-47s, and other automatic or sub-automatic weapons that they use to further their criminal enterprise. But the fact that they're now out on the street in the middle of a riot, you saw and heard, of course, the fireworks going off. That type of imagery and sound is being repeated in towns and cities right across the country. We'd had reports of potential gunfire in a number of cities, but really people not sure because of the fact that there were pyrotechnics that are also being set off. But there you can quite clearly see the individuals that were by that car firing into the air. So of great concern to the authorities here that, yes, they're firing in the air there, but at some point, will that weaponry be turned on these officers who are trying to combat the violence that we're seeing right across the country?
And of those people arrested, of which there are hundreds of them, particularly concerning is that so many of them are teenagers.
Yes, 875 arrested so far. The vast majority are aged between 13 and 18. The average age, in fact, we're told, is 17. And Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has been highlighting how concerned he is that so many young people are getting caught up in this, urging parents to do their part to ensure that their youngsters are not out on the streets in the evening and potentially partaking in this violence. He's also urging the social media companies to do more to try to take down some of these videos that are emerging.
Yeah, now this is interesting because we had this crisis meeting when he said they're not considering a state of emergency yet. However, and he's named at least, I think, Snapchat, TikTok, several others, and said in the next hours we will take measures, and we've started taking measures in coordination with these platforms to remove the most sensitive content. State services working with these platforms to obtain an effective response. I mean, this is pretty significant, where they're basically going in to control the internet and social media.
Well, yeah, I mean, they may be determined to try to do that. What the response will be from these tech giants who absolutely, defend the right to be able to have people use their platforms free from censorship. But at the same time, of course, with that comes a responsibility, and it's always that line, that you cross from sort of freedom to be able to chat and to share images with regard to the responsibility of not showing images that might inflame a situation. But Emmanuel Macron highlighting TikTok and Snapchat as two social media platforms that he feels are being utilised by the rioters. There's an app that's also out there, apparently, that's showing the worst of the violence that you can see here, flashing up the locations where that violence is taking place in real time. And then people seeing that are, descending on these areas and making it far worse.
President Macron said, we sometimes have the feeling that some of them these are the young people, some of them are living in the streets, the video games that have intoxicated them.
Yes, I mean, listen, this is a complicated situation. There's the death of a young man who many people feel very aggrieved at his loss, mixed with a lot of social commentary about the situation in terms of the immigrant population in particular in France, and a feeling that they are treated as second-class citizens. And that is being fuelled, and according again to President Macron, as being fuelled by the far left, who are trying to instigate the violence and, taking part in the violence themselves, but also encouraging others to come out to take part in that violence. So you've got that. But on the other hand as well, what you've simply got are young people that are being driven by adrenaline, the excitement of a good scrap, that are going out there in numbers to take part in these violent episodes.
Mark, thank you for bringing us up to speed with that. But let's get the latest from Paris itself now and speak to political broadcaster Antonin Andre, who can join us. And, of course, we reflect that the funeral due to take place tomorrow, and even though the mum, Mounier, calling for calm, one thinks that might be another trigger point. Yes, it will be a trigger point because we are not in the case of the funeral, just the funeral. The death of this young boy is almost forgotten, or it's a pretext for the riots in different cities. So it's not just a problem of the murder by police of a young man. There is other things behind this event, and it's very difficult for French government to make the country calm again. Of that, with this Macron crisis meeting, as we've just been discussing, they're identifying social media maybe one of the things that is stoking this. Yes. The social media is something very new in France in these riots, and it helps young people to move quickly and to make rally in different suburbs, and there is a game between them, between one city and another, to show what can I do, how many cars I can break or put fire, and there is a real mass movement with the social networks that is something new and very difficult to contain.
President Macron says there will be no state of emergency yet. Is it something that you think he will reluctantly have to do?
Yes, maybe we'll have to do that. In 2005, there were riots in France, and the emergency state was decreed after 10 days of riots. So it's a next step to put the state of emergency, but I'm not sure they will do it as soon as I thought they would do that, because they think they can calm down the situation these days, and there is a lot of policemen everywhere in the country. It's a lot of you have drones, you have all the direction, the different services of the police among in the territory. So they think they don't need the state of emergency now, but I think it will arrive next week.
But several towns, they are imposing evening curfews, aren't they? And Marseille, for example, that has banned public demonstrations. Public transport will be stopping early in the evening.
Yes, it's very difficult because, a lot of these population in the suburbs are using the buses, and they need to be outside to go to work, and for them it's very difficult to have this situation, and maybe it will be worse with the curfew because the population will not accept that. But it's very difficult to do in another way, because we need to keep the rioters in their home, and all the people who will be in the streets during the curfew will be considered as the rioters. So it's the cities can do that, and I think in several cities it will be the case, not just in Marseille, but a lot of towns in France and in suburbs town will use the curfew to try to get people in their home during the weekend, because it's very difficult during the weekend. Everybody wants to go out, and it's summertime here, and it will be difficult. I think it is the only way. The policeman involved is now in custody and is facing charges. But looking at the wider political picture, you've had 5 weeks of protests with regards to the pension reforms. What position is Macron in now? And, of course, we have Marine Le Pen and the far right making much of what they're seeing on the streets at the moment. It's very difficult for him because he had words to tell that he was very sad with the death of this young boy, and he said that the police
the policeman has failed in the arrestation. So he made a choice to tell the population that the victim was the victim and the policeman had failed in his mission. And this is why it's very difficult, because Marine Le Pen and all the right in France says that Emmanuel Macron is not behind his police and is laxist. And it's a big test for him to try to show that he can't restore calm and peace in France. And the right and the right parties and Marine Le Pen won't help him. They blow on the fire to make the country anarchy in the country, and the left wing also. Jean-Luc Mélenchon is also someone who is in a hunger, and he tells people not coming back at home. Don't be calm, don't be quiet. It's not the problem. It's a problem of justice. So it's very difficult for Macron, because there is the two sides of the political chess, who is against him and who is in the violence and not in the calm, in the appeasement.
Anthony, thank you very much indeed for updating us there with the picture in Paris. And of course, we'll see what emerges in the coming days. Thank you very much indeed.
Bringing you a quick bit of breaking news, because Sue Gray, I'm sure you've all heard of her. She is the civil servant who compiled that report into lockdown parties at Downing Street, which ultimately led to the fall of Boris Johnson. Well, we have heard in the last few minutes that she can begin to work as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff from September.
Of course, to remind you, claims that the appointment rules were broken, designed to prevent a conflict of interest. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer saying he'd accepted the advice of the Akoba watchdog effectively. Delighted, he said, to be welcoming her to his Chief of Staff. She will lead our work preparing for a mission-led Labour government and brings unrivalled experience in how the machinery of government works. And a woman of great integrity, he added.
Of course he would add that. Now, coming up, a plan to end the NHS reliance on overseas workers. But the Prime Minister's blueprint today has little to say on pay or waiting lists. We're talking about that NHS massive workforce plan, and we'll be talking more about it after this break. Stay with us on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth
did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk on GB News with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. The Prime Minister has outlined a new £2.4 billion workforce plan for the NHS to fix staff shortages.
Well, it aims to create more university places for medical and nursing students, apprenticeships even for doctors, and a potential for shorter medical degree periods too.
It aims to prevent the estimated shortage of 360,000 NHS workers by 2037.
Let's speak to our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who was in that news conference in Downing Street and actually asked the Prime Minister a question about pay, which wasn't featured in this 151-page report.
Yes, that's right. A big day for Rishi Sunak today and a big day for the NHS with this long-awaited 15-year workforce plan. They said there were three focuses. First of all, train. They're going to be training double the number of doctors, more nurses, more apprenticeships. Also, retaining staff. Now, that's critically important, isn't it? Morale, as we know, is very low. Lots of people have left the profession. They talked about improving the culture, improving well-being, talking about professional development. They did not talk about pay. We'll come back to that in just a second. And then finally, reform, stressing the need to do things differently, to spend money better use of using the pharmacist, making it easier to get an appointment at the GP using sophisticated cloud-based phone technology, keeping people looked after in the community rather than putting them into hospital where possible, because of course that's very expensive. So these plans have been welcomed pretty much across the board, but there are significant short-term challenges. One of them, of course, being the fact that we're still in the middle of lots of NHS strikes. Now, the nurses' strikes, the porters' strikes may be over, but we're facing 5 days of junior doctors' strikes in July, and now consultants have also voted to go on strike. So yes, I asked Rishi Sunak about his priority of cutting the waiting list. They're currently at a 7.4 million record high, and how they were going to do this, given that previously they said, oh, we can only give you whatever the independent pay review body recommends. But now that it looks like the independent pay review bodies are likely to recommend something around 6 or 6.5% for public sector workers, including junior doctors, Rishi Sunak's now saying, well, actually, we might not be able to do that because we've got to keep a lid on inflation. So sure, great to be training lots of new medical professionals, but if you can't keep them, that raises all sorts of questions, and I think certainly a bumpy ride coming over the next few months with both junior doctors and potentially consultants out on strike.
And Catherine, opposition parties broadly welcoming it, as you say, but they can't resist a bit of a pop, can they? I mean, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting saying that ministers have simply nicked the opposition's plan.
Yes, that's absolutely what Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary, is saying. And I mean, it is true that Labour have been saying for a long time they would double the number of medical places, which is one of these pledges. So Labour basically going, you've nicked our plan. The Lib Dems going, what has taken you so long? Now, Rishi Sunak, of course, would say, well, I've only been Prime Minister for a few months. But of course, it is true that we have had a Conservative government since 2010, and the NHS is facing very severe challenges now, although these measures coming in will help going forward, but that's going to take some time.
Catherine at Downing Street, thanks very much indeed for that. More reaction, of course, as we get it. But let's get an update now on the latest news headlines. Rhianna's waiting for us.
Mark, thank you. It's 2:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has set out the government's 15-year plan to boost NHS staffing in England. The 151-page blueprint aims to plug shortages of over 300,000 staff. It includes more university places for medical and nursing students, as well as greater emphasis on apprenticeships. Lord Zach Goldsmith says he's happy to apologise for sharing his views on the Commons investigation into Boris Johnson's Partygate probe. The Tory peers hit back after Rishi Sunak said he'd refused to apologise, saying his comments about the Privileges Committee were incompatible with his position as a minister. Lord Goldsmith has now admitted he shouldn't have commented publicly. In his resignation letter, he accused the government of climate change apathy, saying it made his role as Minister for International Environment untenable. As we've been hearing, Sue Gray has been given the go-ahead by the appointments watchdog to take up her role as Labour's Chief of Staff. The former civil servant led the investigation into lockdown parties in Downing Street. The Advisory Committee on Business Appointments says she'll take up the position from September. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he's delighted. And British travellers to France are being warned they could face disruption, including possible curfews following widespread riots across the country. More than 200 police were injured and 875 people arrested during a third night of violence. Protesters are demanding justice for a 17-year-old known as Nahel M, who was shot dead by police after he failed to stop his car in Nanterre on Tuesday. The officer who fired the shot has been charged with voluntary homicide. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
And welcome back to the live desk. Prince Harry back in the headlines today because his lawsuit against Mirror Group newspapers is due to conclude at the High Court later this afternoon.
The Duke of Sussex and several others have accused the newspaper of phone hacking and unlawful information gathering. But there's been a last-minute row over a letter.
Let's get more on that. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker outside the court to explain, a bit of last-minute drama, Cameron.
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise, Mark, actually, this morning, where David Sherborne, Prince Harry's lawyer, stood up and asked the judge to consider this letter which had been presented to him last minute from a journalist who had written one of the 33 articles being tested in this case for Prince Harry, where alleged unlawful information gathering was used in order to write the article. So David Sherborne told the judge the letter contains direct evidence in relation to particular origin of the information in which the article the article was being complained about, and it relates to alleged voicemail interception post 2006 and the Duke of Sussex. Now the judge asked David Sherborne, you closed your evidence last week, are you going to keep bringing letters forward every time that another letter comes forward? There has to be an end point to when evidence can be presented. Now in response, David Sherborne said it directly relates to questions your lordships needs to determine. In other words, this letter could be significant in weighing up whether or not Prince Harry was a victim of unlawful information gathering. Now, the judge said your application, it asked him, is your application to admit this letter as evidence, or is it to call this particular journalist forward as a witness? Now, David Sherborne said it was just the letter that he wanted to submit as evidence. Now, the judge told Prince Harry's lawyer that it is an extremely optimistic application. There has to be a limit on when evidence can be submitted because this is the last day of closing arguments. And now David Sherborne said in response he appreciates it's optimistic, but this is a very direct letter which could really help with his judgment. Now, Andrew Green, Casey, representing Mirror Group newspapers, he said that the evidence is being brought way too late and there is also not an element of truth in the letter which has been written. David Sherborne urged the judge to asked him to read the letter before weighing up whether it could be used in evidence. Now, Andrew Green said that this is an attempt to get evidence through via the back door. He also told the judge, once you have read that letter, there is no unreading the letter. Now, David Sherborne, representing Prince Harry, he says that the judge is experienced enough to be able to read something in principle before making a decision as whether or not to use it as part of the evidence. Now, the judge said in his summing up, in his decision, I'm not going to entertain this any further. It's a letter to the court. There's an issue about privilege. It would be wrong in principle. It wouldn't be fair on the defendants not to be able to question the journalist who wrote it. This has been submitted 10 days after the evidence was closed. He cannot entertain this at this late stage. I will not read the letter and I will not admit it as evidence. Well, at the moment, a Mirror Group newspaper newspaper lawyer, not Andrew Green KC, but another lawyer. He is taking the judge through some test cases, separate cases, which could help the judge make up his mind on this ruling to do with Prince Harry and other high-profile people and their case against Mirror Group newspapers, who they accuse of unlawful information gathering at its titles. Later on this afternoon, David Sherborne KC, representing the claimants, he will give his final closing arguments to the judge, and then Mr. Justice Fancourt will make his ruling at a later date.
Cameron, thanks very much indeed for that.
Birmingham City Council is locked in talks with the government after revealing it has to pay up to £760 million to settle equal pay claims. The Labour-run council has already paid out £1.1 billion to settle claims after a ruling at the Supreme Court over pay 11 years ago.
Then, following the implementation of a new IT system, analysis revealed a huge additional cost that the council still has to pay in terms of back pay, and they admit they don't have the money to do so. Let's get more with our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson outside Council House, where Birmingham City Council are based. And Jack, the bill's still rising, could be up to an extra, what, 14 million each month?
Yeah, that's right. With this liability, it's £5 to £14 million that gets added on to this equal pay bill every month, of course, that is not cleared and covered. As you were mentioning there, this all stems from a 2012 Supreme Court ruling where a number of employees at the council in roles such as teaching assistant, cleaners, catering staff brought forward how they had been missing out on bonuses traditionally given to people in male-dominated sectors of employment, such as street cleaners and refuse collectors. They, of course, the Supreme Court, of course, settled in their favour, and that's meant that over the past 10 years, this council has settled £1.1 billion worth of equal pay payments. It was, as you mentioned, alongside this over the past few months, they have been implementing this new financial and database system. That system itself is over budget and has also had lots of implementation problems. It's because of those problems, in light of those problems, that they then decided to conduct this analysis into the equal pay claims, where they have found this black hole essentially of 650 to 760 million pounds. Now, the council say that this is of course deeply apologetic for these issues and how it's got to the point of these issues, and of course it says with its budget and even its reserves it can't cover this cost. Now, the leader of the opposition on the council here and leader of the local Birmingham Conservatives, Robert Alden, says the council should have seen this coming.
And we're really concerned about the impact it could have on those most vulnerable people in the city. And that's why we're calling on the council to now start coming clean about what they're considering, what the impact's going to be, and work with opposition groups on the council to actually try and get this resolved. Because we've been warning them about what the issues are, but the Birmingham Labour Cabinet refused to listen, and now Birmingham taxpayers are going to be paying the price for years to come of their failure. Even Labour Cabinet members were tweeting that they felt there was an issue, but they didn't do anything about it. And to put it into context, it's like your neighbour stopping you and telling you you've got a broken tile on your roof. But instead of fixing the roof, you just hope it doesn't rain. And that's what the Labour Council's done here. They've hoped the problem would go away, and now Birmingham taxpayers are being hit with a £760 million bill because of it. People looking at Birmingham will be worried about exactly what a Labour government would do in this country if they keep repeating the kind of behaviour we've seen here in Birmingham, where they're running up bills, unable to pay them, leaving valuable services that are needed by vulnerable people at risk.
A quick apology to you, our viewers, because you might have seen a very rude member of the public behind Jack then, doing something a little bit unmentionable. Jack, though, we will return to this. And just as we were hearing there, residents in Birmingham are definitely going to feel the impact of this.
Yeah, that's right. Essentially, the council are having to completely re-budget for this year, of course, in contact with the government around where they can spend their money. Every single penny that this council spends will now be under mass scrutiny. They are putting together a budget recovery plan to, of course, include paying off some of these equal pay claims as well. But of course, when you put this into context, the amount that they owe, £760 million it's thought it's up to, you look at the annual spend that this council spends on services to help, of course, most of those services go towards vulnerable people, public services as well. Their total annual budget for that is £750 million. That indicates how much of a scale and how much of a financial problem this is for the council. And of course, that could well go deeper because, of course, if the council believes and it can't come to a solution with the government, the council could issue a Section 114 notice, 114 notice. That essentially means that the council says it can't meet its financial liabilities. That essentially is bankrupt, declaring bankruptcy as a council. And so the government at that point could then step in for a multiple of years to try and get this council's finances back on track.
Jack, thank you very much indeed for updating us with extraordinary figures in Birmingham, and we'll follow that story, of course, to see what kind of solution is found. Now, actor Kevin Spacey has been appearing at Southwark Crown Court. The prosecution, they're describing him as a sexual bully and a predator who took pleasure in groping young men, all that being said in the opening statements.
4 men have accused the two-time Oscar winner of sexual offences, but he denies 4 counts of sexual assault and one of causing a person to engage in penetrative sexual activity.
Let's get more with our reporter Lisa Hartle, who's been following this case at Southwark Crown Court. And, well, it's pretty dramatic evidence, but, of course, we reflect that he has denied all these charges.
Yeah, Kevin Spacey has left the court now. Whilst he was in court today, he seemed relaxed and he made notes whilst the prosecution made their opening arguments. Now, Mr. Spacey, the actor best known for films such as American Beauty, faces 12 charges relating to 4 men. The charges allegedly took place between 2001 and 2013. Much of the alleged offending took place when Mr. Spacey was the creative director of the Old Vic Theatre in London. The charges he's facing are 3 counts of indecent assault, 7 counts of sexual assault, 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent, and 1 count of causing a person to engage in penetrative sexual activity without consent. In their opening statement, the prosecution claimed Spacey is a sexual bully, a man who doesn't respect personal boundaries or space, who seems to delight in making others feel powerless and uncomfortable. The jury also heard details of the allegations that the 4 men had made. The prosecution alleged that one of the complainants was assaulted after writing to Mr. Spacey for mentoring, that he went to his flat, fell asleep, woke up to Kevin Spacey sexually assaulting him. The prosecution told jurors to concentrate on the evidence and not to get starstruck because of the actor's fame. The defence also addressed the jury, briefly telling them that they'll get insights into fame and how people change once you're famous, telling them Mr. Spacey was rich and influential, asking what did these complainants want. He also asked them, has Mr. Spacey coming out as gay left him vulnerable to opportunists? The trial is expected to last 4 weeks, with evidence being given on Monday, and Mr. Spacey strongly denies all charges.
Lisa, thank you very much indeed for updating us. As you say, some weeks to go in terms of that case and the evidence. Thank you for the latest there.
Back to that news we brought you a few minutes ago. Sue Gray, that civil servant who we all know, she compiled the report into lockdown parties at Downing Street and led to the fall of Boris Johnson ultimately. Well, she can now begin work as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff from September. With us is our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Is this much of a surprise, Tom?
Well, there are 2 ways to look at this. First of all, the Conservatives were very concerned that Sue Gray may have broken civil service rules because she had meetings with Sir Keir Starmer without declaring them to relevant ministers. Now, on the face of it, that goes against the rules of civil servants leaving their positions. Also, there's a bit of precedent of a former civil servant who worked under David Cameron's government who had to wait a year before being elevated to the House of Lords. However, ACOBA, the Committee on Business Appointments, has not made that decision in this case. The gardening leave, the period of leave that Sue Gray must leave between her departure of the civil service and starting working for Sir Keir Starmer has been determined to be 6 months in this case. And indeed, instead of what some people had expected, perhaps a year, multiple years even, perhaps a ban on this sort of political appointment, COBA, as it's known, has said that this appointment can continue, only being delayed by 6 months.
Yeah, the committee saying no evidence that a decision-making or impartiality was impaired while serving in Whitehall. His clean bill of health, in other words.
Absolutely. It does, however, acknowledge that meetings were had with Sir Keir Starmer in October last year, which the Cabinet Office has pointed out would be a technical breach of that responsibility to inform ministers of political meetings. But yes, the COBA has looked through potential breaches of impartiality in the work of Sue Gray and has not found any.
What will she be doing? How important is this job? I mean, is this the mastermind behind Sir Keir Starmer?
This is a crucial appointment for Sir Keir Starmer, the Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Opposition. The reason why Sir Keir Starmer really wanted this appointment and why this 6 months, rather than a year or 2 years, matters a huge, huge deal is because the Labour Party has been out of power for 13 years now. What Sir Keir Starmer wants is an insider to help build his political operation so that he is ready to enter number 10 if he were to win the next election, as the polls
ground
suggest
running, I think is the
that he
phrase
will.
he's used. Yeah.
Indeed. And so a 1 year or 1.5 or 2 year suspension would mean Sue Gray wouldn't be able to do that groundwork and building up that operation in the run-up to the election. She'd only be able to enter after the election. So this is a really good news day for the Labour Party. It's another massive stroke of luck for Sir Keir Starmer, who seems to have been incredibly fortunate in Scotland, the SNP imploding, in England, the Conservative parties at war, and across the civil service, this allowing of Sue Gray to turn up. It really has been an incredibly lucky few weeks for Sir Keir Starmer. But yes, 6 month preclusion. She's able to start work in the autumn, and that means she will have a good few months, perhaps even a year, working in the Leader of the Opposition's office, preparing a potential Starmer number 10 operation.
Have the Tories commented on this yet? Are they likely to?
The Conservatives have been privately very admonishing of the whole process, and of course the Cabinet Office and indeed Cabinet Office ministers have been saying some pretty hard words at the dispatch box in previous weeks. This is fresh news, however, and as far as we can see, the Conservative Party have not yet released a statement.
Yeah, they're swallowing their pride, maybe. But, of course, a big day for them with the NHS announcement anyway, which Labour accused them of stealing their clothes. So,
absolutely.
Tom, thank you for taking us through that. So, Sue Gray in a new job, and, of course, we'll update you on all the reaction to that. We'll be back at 12 on Monday with all the latest on the live desk, but Patrick Christis is with you next. Stay with us on GB News.
Good afternoon. After a fairly drab Friday, brighter skies for most of us this weekend, a bit of sunshine, a few showers mostly across the north and some strong winds at times across northern Scotland. That's going to be created by this area of low pressure, which is gradually just moving in. It's going to stick around through the weekend, but across the far north. These weather fronts have moved in through the day, but they will be pulling away and taking the rain with them. But not yet. It's a pretty soggy evening out there, some heavy bursts of rain in places, and it'll stay overcast, rain and drizzle on and off for much of the evening, only slowly easing off that rain, particularly in the eastern areas as we go through the early hours. Quite a warm, humid night, temperatures sticking up 15, 16 degrees, a little cooler further north and west, but still mostly in the teens to start the weekend. We also start the weekend with a lot of clouds, so a fairly grey morning, a little bit of light rain here and there, but I think most places will turn dry and brighten up with some sunny spells. Main exception to that will be northern Scotland, particularly Shetland, where it could be a very wet day, and the wind's picking up here too. Plenty of showers coming in over the mountains in the northwest, bar the odd one for Northern Ireland and northwest England. Most places will be dry and bright. But warm again in the southeast, 23, 24, cooler further north, temperatures in the high teens, so close to average, but feeling colder in the winds, which will strengthen on Saturday evening across the northwest, getting very gusty here through the night and into Sunday. Further spells of rain over the Northern Isles as well. Again, most of the rest of the country just a bit breezy but dry. And probably a sunnier start to Sunday, better chance of a bit more blue sky. Again, some cloud will bubble up, a few showers for Northern Ireland, northwest England, and frequent showers in the northwest with that gusty wind. But eastern Scotland, pretty well sheltered, much of the south, dry and bright with some sunshine, and temperatures, again, around average, a little higher in the southeast, but feeling chillier in that strong wind in the northwest. Have a good weekend.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to